In today's video, we'll look at the year with the most executions in the history of death row in the United States, 1999. A total of 98 people were executed, marking a record that remains unbroken to this day. Throughout this video, we'll go through each of their cases, the crimes they committed, how they were executed, what they chose for their last meal, and what their final words were. John Glenn Moody. State, Texas. In July 1988, 35-year-old John Glenn Moody brutally raped and murdered Maureen Louise Malden, a 77-year-old widow who had previously hired him as a gardener and occasional worker at her home in Abilene. On July 3rd, Moody entered Malden's residence, sexually assaulted her, beat her with a fireplace brush, and strangled her with a telephone cord, which he left tightly wrapped around her neck. During the attack, he also stole her purse, wallet, and 2 rings she regularly wore. Her body was discovered the following day by her sister. Moody was arrested for public intoxication just hours after the body was found, and the stolen rings were discovered in his pocket. Key evidence included a bloody fingerprint identified as his on the home's telephone, along with a witness who saw a truck with matching license plates leaving the crime scene. During the trial, Moody's long criminal history was revealed: 21 prior convictions across 3 states for crimes such as burglary, theft, and sexual assault. His own wife testified that he had sexually abused their 10-year-old adopted daughter. On February 28, 1989, he was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. The execution took place on January 5, 1999, at the Huntsville unit by lethal injection. Moody was 46 years old at the time of his death. When asked if he had any last words, John said, "I'd like to apologize and ask forgiveness for any pain and suffering I have inflicted upon all of you, including my family. All of you, I am very sorry. There is a point where a man wants to die in judgment. Though my judgment is merciful, I hope and pray that all those involved, as well as the judgment upon y'all, will one day be more merciful than mine. God bless you all. Godspeed. I love you. Remain strong. Ask God to have mercy. I love you all, too. I'm very sorry. I've got to go now. I love you. Dobie Gillis Williams, State, Louisiana. In July 1984, 23-year-old Dobie Gillis Williams was charged with the brutal murder of Sonia Nippers in Many, Louisiana. While on furlough from prison for a minor offense, he broke into the victim's home during the early morning hours by stacking boxes to climb through the bathroom window. Armed with a knife and without pants, he waited for her and attacked when she entered. Sonia was stabbed 8 times and bled to death in her husband's arms, after managing to identify her attacker as a black man. Williams was arrested shortly afterward. He had scratches consistent with having escaped through a window. Although his confession was not recorded, he led investigators to the murder weapon and to his bloodstained shirt hidden at his grandfather's house. The physical evidence and his statements directly tied him to the crime. Williams was charged with first-degree murder. Due to extensive media coverage, the trial was moved to another parish, where an all-white jury found him guilty after 4 days and sentenced him to death. For his last meal, Williams requested 12 chocolate bars, a pint of chocolate ice cream, lemon cake, coconut cake, and a Coca-Cola. He was executed by lethal injection on January 8, 1999, at 7:48 p.m. at the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. He was 38 years old at the time of his death. When asked for his final words, Williams said, "I just want to say, I don't have any hard feelings against anybody. God bless y'all. God bless." Kelvin Shelby Malone. State, Missouri. Kelvin Shelby Malone was a serial killer whose 1981 crime spree led to death sentences in both California and Missouri. Born in California, he began his criminal career at an early age and was released on parole despite a 7-year sentence. Shortly after, while awaiting sentencing for theft and burglary, he escaped custody and began a series of violent crimes that included kidnappings, robberies, and multiple murders. On March 17, 1981, in St. Louis, Missouri, Malone murdered taxi driver William Parr. Ballistics evidence later linked the murder weapon to a pistol found in Malone's possession at the time of his arrest. In the days that followed, he was also responsible for at least 2 more murders in California, those of Myrtle Benham and Minnie Ola White, and was connected to the disappearance of another victim. Malone was sentenced to death in California and was later tried in Missouri for the murder of William Parr. He was found guilty and sentenced to death in 1984. Despite numerous state and federal appeals, all of his convictions were upheld. In December 1998, he was extradited from California to Missouri to face execution. He was executed on January 13, 1999, at the Potosi Correctional Center by lethal injection. He was pronounced dead at 1:20 a.m. and offered no final words. Jess James Gillies. State, Arizona. In January 1981, 20-year-old Jess James Gillies and his accomplice Michael Logan committed one of the most horrific crimes in Arizona. They tricked 26-year-old Suzanne Rossetti by offering to help her with her car, then kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and held her captive in her own apartment while stealing her belongings. That same night, they took her to a cliff outside Phoenix, threw her off a 12-meter drop, and when they saw she was still alive, they threw rocks at her and buried her under stones. The autopsy revealed that Rossetti was alive for several minutes after being buried. Police tracked the suspects using her bank card and found a receipt with Gillies' name in the victim's car. Both were arrested 5 days later, and Gillies confessed to the crime. On August 28, 1981, a jury found him guilty of computer fraud, kidnapping, armed robbery, rape, and first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death and received lengthy sentences for the other offenses. His accomplice, Logan, was sentenced to life imprisonment and died in prison in 2021. Jess James Gillies was executed by lethal injection on January 13, 1999, at 3:06 p.m. at the Arizona State Prison in Florence. He was 38 years old at the time of his death. He did not give any final words nor request a last meal. Troy Dale Ferris. State, Texas. In the early hours of December 4, 1983, 21-year-old Troy Dale Ferris killed Tarrant County Sheriff's Deputy Clark Rosenbaum. The deputy had interrupted a drug deal on the side of the road near Saginaw. Rosenbaum was shot twice with a .357 revolver. One bullet was stopped by his bulletproof vest, but the other entered under his arm, piercing his heart and lungs. Almost a year later, an informant reported that Ferris was bragging about the crime at a party, which led to his arrest. The trial began in May 1986. A jury found Ferris guilty of capital murder, and during a separate sentencing hearing, they answered yes to questions of future dangerousness and deliberate guilt, resulting in a death sentence. Ferris was executed by lethal injection on January 13, 1999, at the Walls Unit in Huntsville. After a 1-hour delay due to a last-minute Supreme Court appeal, he was pronounced dead at 7:16 p.m. at age 36. He did not request a special last meal. His final words spoken while strapped to the gurney were, "First off, to the Rosenbaum family, I have nothing but love for you." Clark did not die in vain. Through his death, he led this man to God. I love you. I'm done. Mark Arlo Shepard. State, Virginia. In November 1993, 22-year-old Mark Arlo Shepard brutally murdered Richard and Rebecca Rosenbluth in their home in Chesterfield County, Virginia. Shepard had been selling cocaine to the couple for months, and Richard owed him a large sum of money. On November 28th, Shepard arrived at their residence with his partner Andre Graham and another man, Benji Vaughn. Both the victims were executed at close range. Richard was shot twice in the head, and Rebecca was shot 4 times in the head and neck. There were no signs of a struggle or forced entry, indicating they knew their killers. After the murders, the assailants stole the couple's belongings and vehicles. Police found 61 fingerprints of Shepard at the scene and arrested him days later while he was attempting to burn Richard's car. He was found with items belonging to the victims, including Rebecca's watch and credit cards. Investigators linked Shepard to a .38 caliber pistol used in the murders, while Graham used a .45 caliber pistol. During the 1994 trial, Shepard was found guilty of 2 counts of capital murder. The jury sentenced him to death twice, 1 sentence for each victim. Mark Arlo Shepard was executed by lethal injection on January 20, 1999, at 9 p.m. at the Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia. He was 27 years old at the time of his death. He did not offer any last words before his execution. Joseph Ernest Atkins, State, South Carolina. In 1969, 22-year-old Joseph Ernest Atkins fatally shot his half-brother Charles during an argument in North Charleston, South Carolina. Although there was initially a plea agreement for manslaughter, Atkins was tried for murder, found guilty, and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, he was released on parole in 1980 due to the intervention of his adoptive father. In October 1985, after years of struggling with alcoholism, Atkins committed a new massacre. Armed with a machete, a sawed-off shotgun, and a revolver, he broke into the neighboring duplex where he lived. There, he killed 13-year-old Karen Patterson and her father, Aaron Polite. He then fatally shot his own 75-year-old adoptive father, Benjamin Atkins. Atkins was captured following a motorcycle chase shortly after fleeing the scene. Witnesses reported that he had expressed violent intentions earlier that night. In June 1986, Joseph was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death. His last meal before execution was steak, French fries, corn on the cob, salad, and chocolate pudding for dessert. Joseph Ernest Atkins was executed by lethal injection on January 23, 1999, at the Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. He was 51 years old at the time of his death and did not make any final statements. Martin Sauceda Vega, State, Texas. In July 1985, 38-year-old Martin Sauceda Vega ambushed and murdered 36-year-old James Mims in a rural area near Luling. The crime was not passionate. Vega claimed he had agreed with the victim's wife to kill her husband to collect a $150,000 insurance policy. After hitting Mims with a revolver and shooting him 8 times, Vega attempted to drown him, then abandoned the body in a ditch and hid the weapon. The investigation stalled until January 1988, when Vega turned himself in, confessed, and led authorities to the .22 caliber revolver he had used. He stated that Linda Mims, who later married him, had instigated the murder and promised him $30,000 from the insurance, though prosecutors never charged her. The Caldwell County jury indicted him for capital murder for remuneration. During the 1989 trial, his voluntary confession, recovery of the weapon, and matching ballistics convinced the jury. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. His last meal before execution was a T-bone steak, shrimp, and a Coca-Cola. The execution took place on January 26, 1999, by lethal injection at the Walls Unit in Huntsville. Vega was 52 years old, and there was no gubernatorial intervention. He was pronounced dead at 6:21 p.m. When asked if he had any final words, he said, "I really don't have much to say. Linda is innocent of this. I am innocent of this. This is a conspiracy. Ain't no telling who gonna be next. That's all I have to say. By Derek Leonard Gerloff. State, Arizona. In January 1975, Derek Leonard Gerloff was convicted of robbery at age 19, beginning a criminal path that would ultimately lead him to death row. On January 24, 1980, along with Joseph Encinas and James Leisure, he randomly targeted 22-year-old Scott Schwartz, a young man on crutches who offered them a ride. Shortly after getting into the car, Gerloff pulled a gun on Schwartz and forced him to drive into the desert, where he demanded money under threat. They then pulled him out of the car and brutally beat him for over 10 minutes before deciding to kill him to prevent him from identifying them. Gerloff attempted to run Schwartz over multiple times with the vehicle, eventually succeeding. Then, while Schwartz was still alive and begging for his life, Gerloff stabbed him over 20 times with a screwdriver, and Leisure added another 10 to 20 stabs. Days after the crime, one of the accomplices confessed to a friend, who alerted the police. All three were arrested and confessed. Gerloff's trial began on December 15, 1980, and lasted 4 days. He was found guilty of murder, armed robbery, and kidnapping. He received the death penalty for the murder and additional sentences for the other charges. Over the course of 18 years of appeals, all of his legal arguments were rejected. Encinas was sentenced to life in prison, while Leisure, after pleading guilty, also received a life sentence but was released in 2002 after serving 21 years. Gerloff's last meal, served a day before his execution, consisted of a medium-cooked New York strip steak with Worcestershire sauce, 2 eggs, 8 strips of bacon, 2 slices of buttered toast, mint ice cream, and apple juice. The execution took place on February 3, 1999, at the Arizona State Prison in Florence by lethal injection. Gerloff became the first Native American executed in Arizona since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. When asked for his final words, he remained silent. Sean Sellers. State, Oklahoma. On March 5, 1986, Sean Sellers murdered his mother, Vonda Bellafato, and his stepfather, Lee Bellafato, while they slept in their Oklahoma City home. He wore only his underwear to avoid getting bloodstains on his clothes. To divert attention from himself, Sellers attempted to alter the crime scene to make it look like a burglary. Sometime later, Sellers confessed to the 1985 murder of Robert Paul Bauer, a 32-year-old employee at a Circle K convenience store who had refused to sell him beer. At his trial, Sellers claimed he was practicing Satanism at the time of the murders and insisted he was possessed by a demon named Ezurate. The defense also argued that Sellers was obsessed with the game Dungeons and Dragons, although he himself denied that the game had any connection to his crimes. The jury did not find his claims valid and convicted him of first-degree murder in 1986. Since Oklahoma law at the time did not allow for life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, Sellers was sentenced to death. While in prison, Sellers converted to Christianity and began appearing on television shows such as The Oprah Winfrey Show and Geraldo, as well as in documentaries about Satanism and serial killers. During his appeals in 1999, Sellers argued that he suffered from dissociative identity disorder. However, the court ruled that the timing of his diagnosis was too late and could not be used as grounds for an appeal. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to review his case. As his execution approached, various organizations and public figures, including the European Union, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and Bianca Jagger, condemned his execution due to his age at the time of the crime and his alleged rehabilitation. One day before his execution, Sellers was offered a last meal. He requested Chinese food, spring rolls, sweet and sour shrimp, and fried shrimp. On February 4, 1999, Sean Sellers was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. At 12:17 a.m., 5 minutes after the lethal drugs were administered, he was pronounced dead. When asked for his last words, Sellers addressed his step-siblings. "All of you who hate me right now and are here waiting to watch me die, when you wake up in the morning, you won't feel any different. You'll hate me just as much as you did tonight. When you wake up and nothing has changed inside you, turn to God, and He will be there for you. Turn to God, and He will heal you. Let Him touch your hearts. Don't hate for the rest of your lives. I love you all." He then began singing Christian music, and before receiving the lethal injection exclaimed, "Here I go, Father. I'm coming home. Let's do it, Gary. Let's get started." Finally, he sang, "Release my spirit so I can praise you. Release my spirit so I can worship you." Tony Leslie Fry, State, Virginia. In February 1994, 19-year-old Tony Leslie Fry and 17-year-old Bradford Hinson devised a plan to rob car salesmen by pretending to be interested in purchasing a vehicle. On February 21st, Fry visited a Ford dealership in Richmond, Virginia, and convinced salesman Leland A. Jacobs, 42, to accompany him on a supposed test drive to his grandmother's house in Chesterfield County. During the drive, Fry and Hinson diverted Jacobs to a remote wooded area, where they robbed him and shot him 11 times with a .22 caliber pistol. They then tied his necktie to the bumper of the Ford Explorer and dragged him down a dirt road for 777 feet, deep into the woods. A medical examiner later testified that Jacobs was likely still alive during the dragging. Just 15 minutes later, a police officer, who already had an outstanding arrest warrant for Fry, encountered him and Hinson nearby. Both were taken into custody, and Fry immediately confessed to the murder. At trial, police revealed that Fry had confessed to committing several other crimes, including the burglary of 3 churches, one of which he was a member of, arson of 2 vacant houses, and desecration of a grave. In October 1994, Fry pleaded guilty to capital murder, robbery, and use of a firearm. On January 5, 1995, he was sentenced to death and received an additional 50 years in prison for the other offenses. Fry was executed by lethal injection on February 9, 1999, at the Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia. The execution was witnessed by members of both the victims and the inmates' families. His final words, spoken just minutes before the execution, were, "I'm sorry for what I did, and I've made peace with myself." Jataroon Siripongs, State, California. Jataroon Siripongs, born in 1951 into extreme poverty in Thailand, endured a childhood marked by abuse and inhumane conditions. After serving time in prison in his home country for theft, he reformed, became a Buddhist monk, and later emigrated to the United States, where he briefly held jobs before committing a double homicide in December 1981 in Garden Grove, California. On December 15, 1981, less than 2 years after arriving in the U.S., Siripongs committed the crime that would land him on death row. That day, Pakaven Watanaporn and Kwachin Nguyen were brutally murdered at the store where they worked, Pantai Market. Watanaporn was strangled, while Nguyen was stabbed multiple times, with defensive wounds and a rope tied to his arm. The motive was robbery, as Siripongs was aware that Watanaporn had access to valuable jewelry. Siripongs was arrested on December 17th after using the victim's credit cards. He had cuts on his fingers, and his blood type matched samples found at the crime scene. Stolen jewelry and knives resembling the murder weapon were also found in his possession. Although he admitted to participating in the robbery, he consistently claimed that an accomplice committed the murders. But he never named that person. In April 1983, an Orange County jury convicted him of first-degree murder, robbery, and burglary, sentencing him to death. His execution was initially scheduled for November 1998, but was briefly delayed due to appeals. He was ultimately executed by lethal injection on February 9, 1999, at 12:19 a.m. at San Quentin State Prison. In his final days, he was accompanied by a Buddhist abbot. His last meal consisted of 2 cans of iced tea and 2 cups of canned peaches. No final statement was reported. George Cordova. State, Texas. George Cordova was sentenced to death for his role in a brutal murder and sexual assault that occurred in Texas. On the night of the attack, Cordova and the victim, Jose Hernandez, had a history of prior conflicts. Initially, Cordova approached the car where Hernandez was sitting with his partner, Cynthia West, then returned with his 2 brothers and Manuel Villanueva. Around 2 a.m., the group attacked Hernandez, punching him in the face and pulling him from the vehicle. Cordova assaulted him with a tire iron while Villanueva stabbed him in the neck. Afterward, Cordova dragged Cynthia into the woods, threatened her, and, along with others, stripped, robbed, and raped her. The assailants then fled in Hernandez's car, while Cynthia discovered her boyfriend critically wounded and lying in a pool of blood. In February 1982, Cordova was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Although his initial conviction was overturned due to improper jury instructions, he was retried in 1989, again found guilty, and resentenced to death. Cordova proved to be a highly problematic inmate. He escaped while awaiting trial and, during his time on the run, committed a rape in Florida after forcing a schoolteacher off the road. He was sentenced to 30 years for that crime. He was also involved in a violent prison riot at Sumter Correctional Institution, which left several inmates and a guard injured. Authorities found a handcuff key in his possession, and he was investigated in connection with the stabbing of another inmate. Due to his frequent escape attempts, he earned the nickname Spider-Man. On February 10, 1999, George Cordova was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit at the age of 39. His final words, spoken in Spanish, expressed remorse. "For the pain I've caused you, I am ashamed to even look at your faces. To my brothers on death row. Mexico, Mexico. Danny Lee Barber. State, Texas." On January 17, 1979, Danny Lee Barber murdered 48-year-old Mercedes Mendez by beating, raping, and shooting her 3 times before leaving her body in a wooded area. This was the second of several murders he committed, beginning with the killing of Raymond Curley in 1978 and ending with the murder of Mary Caperton in April 1980. The crime that led to Barber's death sentence occurred on October 8, 1979, when he broke into the home of 50-year-old Janice Louise Ingram in Balk Springs, Texas. Barber, who had previously worked as a gardener for Ingram and her mother, used an iron pipe to beat her to death. He then stole personal belongings and left her body at the scene, where it was discovered more than 2 weeks later by her relatives. Barber was arrested in May 1980 for a minor theft, and during questioning, he confessed to killing Ingram and admitted responsibility for 3 other murders. In his confessions, he revealed having engaged in sexual activity with 2 of the victims' corpses, displaying a disturbing pattern of necrophilia that shocked investigators. In August 1980, Barber was sentenced to death for the murder of Janice Ingram and received life sentences for the other killings. His execution was delayed in December 1998, just an hour before it was scheduled to occur, due to a federal lawsuit challenging clemency procedures in Texas. However, his execution was ultimately approved. Danny Lee Barber was executed by lethal injection on February 11, 1999, at the age of 43 in the Huntsville unit. In his final statement, he addressed the victim's family with remorse and claimed he had changed over time. "Hello, Mrs. Ingram. It's good to see you. I said I could talk, but I don't think I can. I heard that one of your nieces had some angry words. I had nothing to do with the delay. I've spent the last 20 years trying to figure out what's going on. I pray that you get over it, and that's all I can think to say. I'm sorry for what I did, but I'm a different person from back then. If you had known me over the years, maybe you could have seen that. I have some people here who believe that. I want to speak to my friends here for a second. Well, it's good to see you guys. Take care of Mary Lynn for me. Like I said, I already called my mother so she knows. Goodbye. Andrew Flores Cantu. State, Texas. Andrew Flores Cantu was executed for his role in a triple murder for hire that occurred on June 11, 1990 in Abilene, Texas. At just 22 years old, Cantu carried out one of the most shocking crimes of the time: the brutal killings of Mandel Gene Summers, his wife Helen Summers, and Gene's disabled brother Billy Mack Summers. The murders were orchestrated by the couple's adopted son, Gregory Lynn Summers, who planned to collect life insurance and cash from the home. Initially, Gregory Summers approached an acquaintance to carry out the killings, but was turned down. He then offered Cantu $10,000 to do the job, a payment Cantu ultimately never received. On the night of the crime, Cantu, along with Ramon Gonzalez and Paul Flores, broke into the Summers home after cutting the phone line. Cantu viciously stabbed all 3 victims and then set the house on fire. Firefighters later discovered the victims. Helen was found stabbed multiple times in the yard, Gene's body was found burned inside the house, and Billy Mack, who was seriously injured, died at the hospital. In May 1991, Cantu was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. Gregory Summers was also convicted and later executed in 2005. Andrew Flores Cantu was executed by lethal injection on February 16, 1999, at the Huntsville unit, at the age of 31. His execution was delayed for 3 hours due to a last-minute appeal. He made no final statement. His last meal was notably large and included pork ribs, tacos, tortillas, French fries, salad with ranch dressing, red and green chili sauces, jalapenos, tomatoes boiled with garlic and cumin, root beer, and chocolate ice cream. Wilford Lee Berry, State, Ohio. On November 30th, 1989, 27-year-old Wilford Lee Berry Jr. murdered Charles Mitroff, 52, owner of a bakery in Cleveland, Ohio, where Berry had been recently hired as a maintenance worker. Berry conspired with a co-worker, Anthony Lozer, to kill Mitroff, who had gone out to make deliveries. Upon Mitroff's return, Lozer shot him in the torso, and Berry finished him off with a shot to the head. They then buried the body near a bridge and stole his delivery van. In 1990, Berry was convicted of aggravated murder with additional charges of aggravated robbery and burglary, and sentenced to death. Ohio's Supreme Court upheld the sentence in 1995. In 1997, Berry surprised the legal system by waiving all appeals and requesting to proceed with his execution as soon as possible, becoming the first inmate in Ohio to do so since the death penalty was reinstated. His execution, initially scheduled for March 1998, was delayed due to an appeal concerning his mental competence, but was eventually authorized. Berry was executed by lethal injection on February 19, 1999, at age 36 at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville. He declined to make a final statement when given the opportunity. Death was pronounced at 9:31 p.m., 7 minutes after the procedure began. There are no documented signs of distress. James Edward Rodden, State, Missouri. James Edward Rodden Jr. was executed in Missouri for the brutal murder of 17-year-old Terry Trunnell during the early hours of December 6, 1983, in Marshall. Trunnell was killed alongside 21-year-old Joseph Robert Arnold, Rodden's roommate. Rodden had been obsessed with his ex-girlfriend, Terry, and after being rejected multiple times the night before, he returned to the apartment where he found Arnold and Trunnell. Though he claimed self-defense and said he caught Arnold attacking Trunnell, forensic evidence completely contradicted his account. Arnold was stabbed 8 times with no defensive wounds, indicating he was taken by surprise. Trunnell suffered 11 stab wounds, some so severe they fractured bones. She attempted to defend herself but died after several minutes of agonizing. Rodden attempted to cover up the crime by moving Trunnell's body to another room, tying her up, pouring accelerant, and setting the apartment on fire. He then fled in Arnold's vehicle but crashed hours later due to blood loss from self-inflicted wounds. Rodden was arrested soon after and tried separately for both murders. He received life without parole for Arnold's murder and the death penalty for Trunnell's. His sentence was upheld by state courts, and the U.S. Supreme Court denied his appeal in 1991. He was executed on February 24, 1999, at the Potosi Correctional Center at age 38. No final words or last meal details were recorded. Norman Evans Green. State, Texas. On February 13, 1985, 24-year-old Norman Evans Green murdered 18-year-old Timothy Adams, an engineering student working as a clerk at the Dyer Electronics store in San Antonio, Texas, to pay for his studies at the University of Texas. Green and his accomplice, Harold Bowens, visited the store twice that day. During their second visit, when the manager left for lunch, they attempted a robbery. When Adams delayed opening the cash register, Green shot him 4 times, hitting his arm, chest, and abdomen. Both fled without stealing anything. Employees at a nearby business heard the gunshots and found Adams alive but covered in blood. He died 12 hours later from his injuries. Green was arrested shortly after. His fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, a revolver loaded with bullets modified with X-shaped cuts to cause greater damage, indicating premeditation. Green was sentenced to death in 1985, but his conviction was overturned due to jury selection errors. He was retried in 1990, found guilty again, and sentenced to death. Norman Green was executed by lethal injection on February 24, 1999, at the Huntsville unit at age 38. His last meal consisted of barbecue ribs, pork chops, salad with French dressing, baked potato, Texas toast, and Coca-Cola. He made no final statement. Karl LaGrand. State, Arizona. On January 7, 1982, 18-year-old Karl LaGrand and his half-brother, 20-year-old Walter LaGrand, attempted a violent robbery at the Valley National Bank in Marana, Arizona, which resulted in the murder of 63-year-old bank manager Kenneth Hartsock and the attempted murder of 20-year-old employee Don Lopez. Both had recently been released from prison for armed robberies in Tucson. During the assault, the brothers tied and gagged their victims, frustrated that they could not open the vault. Hartsock was stabbed 24 times with a letter opener. Lopez was attacked but survived. The brothers fled without obtaining any money and were arrested the same day in Tucson. They were convicted in 1984 of first-degree murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, and attempted robbery and sentenced to death. Their convictions were upheld in 1987. The case gained international attention because both were German citizens and had not been informed of their right to consular assistance as required by the Vienna Convention. They later contacted the German consulate themselves, but appeals based on this omission were rejected by U.S. courts. Karl LaGrand was executed by lethal injection on February 24, 1999, at the ASPC Florence Central Unit at age 35. He had initially requested to be executed by gas chamber alongside his brother to challenge the constitutionality of the method, but changed his mind at the last moment, delaying his execution by 2 hours. His last meal included roasted chicken, 9 corn tortillas, 2 tomatoes, jalapenos, rice, and 2 cans of Pepsi. His final words expressed remorse. "To the Hartsock family and to Lopez, I'm sorry this has taken so long and dragged on, but from the bottom of my heart, I regret what I did. I hope someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I mean that sincerely from the bottom of my heart. I pray and wish you the best I can. I cannot imagine your loss. I mean that sincerely. I didn't want to do it. To my family, I'm sorry for what I put you through. I have no animosity, bitterness, or hate toward anyone. To those administering this process, I have asked for forgiveness and am willing to forgive as well. God bless you all. I love you." The execution began at 7:56 p.m. and ended at 8 p.m. Reports say Karl kept his eyes open for a long time, but no visible signs of suffering were documented. Walter Bernhardt LaGrand. State, Arizona. As noted above, Walter LaGrand, Karl's half-brother, was executed 1 week later for his role in the same crime. Walter Bernhardt LaGrand was executed on March 3, 1999, at the Florence Central Unit in Arizona at age 37. He chose execution by gas chamber over lethal injection, hoping the method would be declared unconstitutional for its cruelty. His brother Karl originally chose gas but switched to lethal injection and was executed days earlier. Walter's execution was delayed several hours as courts reviewed last-minute appeals. The Ninth Circuit Court briefly stayed the execution, but the U.S. Supreme Court quickly overturned the stay. At 9:15 p.m., cyanide pellets and sulfuric acid were released beneath his chair. LaGrand began coughing violently and gagging before falling forward. His body continued to show spasms and shallow breathing for several minutes. He was pronounced dead at 9:30 p.m., 18 minutes after the procedure began. He was the last person executed by gas chamber in the United States to date. The execution was witnessed by Don Lopez and family members of Kenneth Hartsock. Several witnesses described the scene as distressing. Lopez broke down in tears and was escorted out of the room. Walter LaGrand's last meal included 6 fried eggs, 16 strips of bacon, French fries, a pint of pineapple juice, and 2 cups of coffee. In his final words, he expressed remorse toward the family. "I just want to say sorry to the Hartsock family." First time I really got to see that photograph, possibly referring to a photo of Kenneth Hartsock held by his daughter. I am truly sorry. I hope you find peace. I want to thank Helen, Hartsock's sister, for forgiving us. I want to tell her children and Don Lopez, I hope you find peace. To all my loved ones, I hope you find peace. To all of you here today, I forgive you and hope to be forgiven in my next life. That's all I have to say. George Adrian Quesenberry, Jr., State, Virginia. On September 25, 1989, 27-year-old George Adrian Quesenberry, Jr. murdered 63-year-old Thomas L. Haynes during a robbery attempt at Tri-City Electric Company in Chesterfield County, Virginia. The night before, Quesenberry had been drinking with friends Eric Hinkle and another man at a mobile home park. Under the influence of alcohol, he proposed committing a robbery and chose that company because he was familiar with it from previous purchases. That same night, Eric Hinkle turned himself in to the police and implicated Quesenberry. The following early morning, George was arrested at his home, confessed to the crime, and handed over the murder weapon, stolen money, and other items. Quesenberry was formally charged with capital murder, robbery, and other offenses related to firearm use and forced entry. He was found guilty by a jury trial and sentenced to death, along with other prison sentences. His appeals were rejected by the Virginia Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court. He was executed by lethal injection on March 9, 1999, at Greensville Correctional Center at age 37. When asked if he had a final statement, Quessenberry said, "Yes, I just want to say that I regret what I did to that man's family. I hope they can find peace. And to my family, I love you all. I just want to thank God for everything He's done in my life, the good and the bad, and I ask for forgiveness." Roy Michael Roberts. State, Missouri. On July 3, 1983, 30-year-old Roy Michael "Hog" Roberts was involved in a riot at the Missouri Training Center for Men in Moberly that ended with the murder of 62-year-old corrections officer Thomas Jackson. The incident occurred when Jackson tried to remove a problematic inmate, Jimmy Jenkins, from cell block B. His intervention prompted about 20 to 30 inmates to attack the guards to prevent the removal. According to the official account, while Jackson attempted to return to the control center, he was surrounded and attacked by inmates. Roberts allegedly held Jackson by the head while two other inmates, Robert Driscoll and Rodney Carr, stabbed him in the chest, causing his death. However, Roberts' case was controversial from the start. Initial Department of Corrections reports, based on multiple witness interviews, did not mention him as involved in the murder. Also, no blood was found on his clothes, which is suspicious if he held the officer during the stabbing. Roberts was tried and sentenced to death in 1984. His sentence was upheld by the Missouri Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court denied his appeal. A federal habeas corpus petition also failed. Roy Michael Roberts was executed by lethal injection on March 10, 1999, at Potosi Correctional Center, Missouri. He was 46 years old. He gave no final statement and no details of his last meal are recorded. His co-defendants received different sentences. Rodney Carr was sentenced to life without parole, while Robert Driscoll's death sentence was overturned after it was found that the prosecution had misled the jury by claiming Jackson's blood was on Driscoll's clothing. Andrew Kokoraleis. State, Illinois. Andrew Kokoraleis, 19, was one of 4 members of the infamous Ripper Crew, a satanic group responsible for a series of kidnappings, tortures, and murders of women in the Chicago area between 1981 and 1982. On May 15, 1982, along with his brother Thomas Kokoraleis, Edward Spreitzer, and Robin Gecht, he participated in the kidnapping of 21-year-old Lorraine Laurie Ann Borowski, who was abducted while arriving at her job as a receptionist in an Elmhurst real estate office. Her body was found 5 months later in a cemetery. The Ripper Crew was known for ritualistic brutality. They traveled in a red van looking for lone women to kidnap, rape, torture, and often murder by stabbing and mutilation, particularly amputating breasts, which were used in satanic rituals involving cannibalism and necrophilia. In the days before his execution, Kokoraleis attorneys filed appeals claiming he was wrongfully convicted and that his confession was coerced. They also joined advocates seeking review of multiple death row inmates' cases who alleged police torture in the 1980s. However, Governor George Ryan denied clemency after extensive deliberation. Andrew Kokoraleis was executed by lethal injection on March 17, 1999, at Tams Correctional Center at age 35. It was the first execution in that new facility and the last in Illinois before a statewide death penalty moratorium. He declined a last meal and spent his final day reading the Bible and talking with his brother. His last words were an apology to the Borowski family. "To the Borowski family, I truly am sorry for your loss. I say that sincerely." He died at 12:34 a.m. This was the 526th execution in the U.S. since 1976 and the 12th in Illinois. David Lee Fisher. State, Virginia. David Lee Fisher, 42 years old, planned the murder of 18-year-old David William Wilkie on November 21, 1983, during a hunting trip in Bedford County, Virginia. The goal was to collect a $100,000 life insurance policy that Fisher had obtained on Wilkie, without having a legitimate interest in the young man. Fisher met Wilkie in late 1982 at a motel in North Carolina, and they developed a friendship. Wilkie moved into Fisher's apartment and occasionally worked for him. Fisher initially tried to get Wilkie to kill a woman named Bonnie Jones to collect the insurance, but Wilkie refused and decided to marry Bonnie. Frustrated, Fisher decided to kill Wilkie himself. He hired Bobby Bryce Mulligan to carry out the murder during hunting season. On November 21, 1983, in the Bedford woods, Mulligan shot Wilkie in the back with a shotgun, killing him. Fisher and Mulligan tried to make it look like an accident, but Mulligan later confessed the crime to his parents and the FBI. Fisher collected $50,000 from the insurance and paid Mulligan $7,000. The investigation began after Mulligan's confession in 1986, and the FBI recorded conversations where Fisher discussed details of the murder and offered money to have Mulligan eliminated. In 1987, Fisher was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. His conviction was upheld by the Virginia Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court denied review. Subsequent appeals were denied. David Lee Fisher was executed by lethal injection on March 25, 1999, at Greensville Correctional Center, Virginia, at age 57. It was the 4th execution in Virginia that year, and the 527th in the United States since 1976. He did not make a final statement, nor was a last meal recorded. Charles Henry Rector. State, Texas. On October 17, 1981, Charles Henry Rector, 44 years old, along with his accomplices Anthony Miller and Howard Ray Simon, committed the kidnapping, rape, and murder of 22-year-old Carolyn K. Davis in Austin, Texas. Davis was last seen arriving at her apartment. That night, screams and suspicious noises were heard in the building. Her naked body was found the next day in the Colorado River, where the autopsy confirmed she died by drowning and had a gunshot wound to the head. That same night, Rector was arrested driving a car containing stolen items from Davis's apartment, including weapons, clothing, and jewelry belonging to the victim. Physical evidence was found, such as seminal stains on a pair of jeans matching those Davis wore, and personal belongings linking him directly to the crime. During the trial, Rector was charged with capital murder committed in the course of robbery, kidnapping, and burglary. He was found guilty in 1982 and sentenced to death. One of his accomplices, Howard Ray Simon, died before the trial, and Anthony Miller was acquitted. Rector maintained his innocence until the end, rejecting a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. On March 26, 1999, Rector was executed by lethal injection at the Texas Huntsville unit. Charles Rector's last meal consisted of 3 beef enchiladas, 3 tacos, French fries, and a strawberry milkshake. Rector's last words were, "I want you to know I'm not guilty. And I'll say this to the family. I did not kill your daughter. Take it how you want. Sorry for the pain." He also told his sister he loved her and thanked Henderson for his support. He then began the lethal injection. James David Rich. This prisoner already had his clip in another video added later. James David Rich. State, Virginia. On August 8, 1994, at age 29, James David Rich fatally stabbed Paul Sanford Gwynn, 45, another inmate at the Eastern Correctional Institution in Maury, North Carolina. Rich was already serving a life sentence for a previous murder when he deliberately killed Gwynn with a homemade knife in the prison yard. According to witness testimony, Rich had been offering to put a hit on someone because he desperately wanted to be transferred from the Eastern Prison Facility to Central Prison, believing that killing another inmate would result in his transfer. The murder occurred during an altercation that Gregory Bagley, another inmate, witnessed from beginning to end. Bagley testified that Rich approached Gwyn in the prison yard and demanded money. When Gwyn responded that he did not know what Rich was talking about and that he did not have his money, Rich pulled a knife out of his pants, attacked Gwyn. She attempted to flee, but Rich chased him down and stabbed him at least twice in the back, killing him. Following the stabbing death of Paul Gwyn, Rich was indicted on October 31, 1994, for first-degree murder. The case took an unusual turn when Rich requested to represent himself, a motion that was granted by Judge James Llewellyn on May 15, 1995. However, standby trial counsel was appointed to assist him during the proceedings. On August 15, 1995, Rich pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, acknowledging his responsibility for Gwyn's death. He was sentenced to death in August of the same year. One day before his execution, Rich ate pizza with cheese, black olives, banana peppers, and mushrooms, accompanied by 4 soft drinks, at approximately 5:15 p.m. on the day of his execution. James David Rich was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, on March 26, 1999, at 2 a.m. He was 34 years old at the time of his death. When asked if he had any last words, Rich said, "All praise and glory be to Allah. May He bless this whole world with peace and His utmost blessings, and may He bless this world with His utmost mercy." Harvey Lee, State, Virginia. On December 19, 1983, at age 22, Harvey Lee Green Jr. entered Young's Cleaners in Bethel, North Carolina, armed only with a toy gun, in an attempt to commit robbery. The small dry cleaning establishment was staffed by 17-year-old Sheila Marlene Bland, a high school student working as a cashier, and 33-year-old John Michael Edmondson, a church organist who was a customer at the time. When Green left the store, both victims were dead, having been beaten to death with a pipe that Green found at the scene. The murders occurred during what began as an unplanned robbery in the small town of Bethel in Pitt County. Green, who had recently received a bad conduct discharge from the U.S. Army following a court-martial, was a penniless substance abuser who had returned to his hometown with few prospects and limited skills. Within weeks of the murders, Green confessed to the crimes to police. His cooperation with law enforcement was extensive. He showed police where he had hidden the murder weapon and turned over the blood-splattered pants he had worn during the killings. The pipe was recovered from the yard of a residence located between the Cleaners and Green's residence on December 30, 1983. He was tried and sentenced to death in August 1984. Harvey Lee Green Jr. was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, on September 24, 1999 at 2 a.m. He was 38 years old at the time of his death. Green entered the execution chamber at 1:50 a.m. and lethal drugs were administered at 2:01 a.m. Warden Roby Lee pronounced Green dead at 2:16 a.m. In his final statement, Green expressed remorse and asked for forgiveness from the victims' families, some of whom witnessed the execution. He said, "I'd like to let the public know that the wrong they're doing now, it compounded the wrong I did years ago. It ain't no justification. Ain't no fairness. That's all I got to say, and they know it's right." According to another source, he also stated, "I have always been sorry for the taking of your loved ones from you, and I only ask that you forgive me. I pray that you'll have peace of mind." The execution was significant, as it made Green the first African American to be executed in North Carolina since the state reinstated the death penalty in 1977. He was also the first African American executed in the state since 1961. This occurred despite the fact that 54% of North Carolina's death row inmates were black, in a state where African Americans comprised only 22% of the general population. Arthur Martin Boyd, Jr., State, Virginia. In August 1982, Arthur Martin Boyd, Jr., 36 years old, committed the crime that would define the rest of his life: the murder of his ex-partner, Wanda Phillips Hartman, in Mount Airy, North Carolina. After a relationship of more than 3 years and a recent breakup, Boyd harassed and threatened Hartman until, on August 7, 1982, he stabbed her 37 times in front of witnesses, including the victim's young daughter. He was arrested at the scene, tried, and sentenced to death for first-degree murder. On March 22, 1983, the jury in the Surrey County Superior Court found Boyd guilty of first-degree murder. For more than 16 years, Boyd remained on death row, exhausting all his legal appeals. One day before his execution, he was offered his last meal. Arthur Martin Boyd, Jr. chose 2 bacon and mushroom sandwiches from Wendy's, along with half a liter of chocolate milk. On Thursday, October 21, 1999, at 2 a.m., Boyd was taken to the execution chamber at Central Prison in Raleigh. He was 53 years old at the time of his death. The execution was carried out by lethal injection, with no intervention from Governor James B. Hunt, Jr. Strapped to the execution gurney, he was asked if he had any final words. Boyd responded, briefly and personally, "I love you, Laura." The execution was carried out according to standard protocol. Boyd was immobilized and administered the lethal injection. The procedure proceeded without visible incident or signs of suffering. Death was officially declared a few minutes after the drugs were administered, at 2 a.m. David Jr. Brown, State, Virginia. On August 24, 1980, when David Jr. Brown was 32 years old, he committed a brutal double murder at the married quarters apartments in Pinehurst, North Carolina. The victims were Shelley Diane Chalflynch, 26 years old, and her daughter Christina, just 9 years old. Brown, who worked as a chef at the Pinehurst Hotel, attacked both with multiple stab wounds on a night marked by his excessive consumption of alcohol and amphetamines, leaving a scene of extreme violence and mutilation in the apartment where the events occurred. On the night of the crime, Brown had attended a party where he consumed large amounts of alcohol and at least 5 amphetamines. Around 2:10 a.m., he was seen walking barefoot and staggering along the road, and was taken back to the hotel where he worked. However, shortly after, he left the place and committed the double murder. The bodies were found the next day, August 26th, in horrific conditions. Diane Chalflynch had about 100 stab wounds, severe mutilations, and defensive injuries, while her daughter had multiple cuts and an electrical cord wrapped around her neck. Brown was arrested and brought to trial in December 1980. During the process, he was convicted of first-degree murder for the deaths of both victims. After a separate sentencing phase, the jury decided to impose the death penalty for each murder. The North Carolina Supreme Court upheld both convictions and sentences. During his time in prison, Brown converted to Islam, adopting the name Dawood Abdullah Mohammed, but maintained his innocence throughout all appeals. For his last meal on death row, there is no specific record of what David Jr. Brown requested, although North Carolina regulations allowed inmates to request a special meal before execution. He was executed by lethal injection on November 19, 1999, shortly after 2 a.m., at the Central Prison in Raleigh at the age of 51. The execution was carried out without technical complications and in the presence of several family members of one of the victims. When asked for his last words during a recent interview before his execution, he said, "It is my belief, a very well-founded belief, that whatever happens on Friday is meant to be. My soul was prepared a long time ago. I have put this in the hands of God and in the hands of Governor Hunt. That is all I can do. All I can say to the family is that I'm sorry for their loss, but I did not do this. I did not kill Diane or her daughter. I do not believe the people of North Carolina would want that on their consciences, killing an innocent man. Robert X.L. White, State, Texas. On May 9, 1974, Robert X.L. White, 36 years old, began a violent crime spree in Texas. That night, following an argument with Roy Perryman, a weapons collector in Waco, White stabbed him to death and stole more than 24 firearms from his collection, including a .30 caliber machine gun. The next day, White and his accomplices, brothers James and Gary Livingston, headed northeast of Dallas, where in the early morning they stopped at a small store called Hilltop Grocery in Collin County. There, White forced 3 men, the owner Preston Broyles and 2 young customers, into the store. He then executed all 3 with a machine gun, killing them. After the shooting, they stole only a small amount of money and fled, leaving the victims' empty wallets scattered along the highway. White fled to Mississippi, where he confessed the murders and robbery to the police. 28 stolen guns were recovered from his car, although the murder weapon was later found in the Brazos River after White admitted to throwing it into the water. He was tried in Dallas and sentenced to death in 1974, a sentence confirmed in 1976. However, his conviction was overturned 12 years later due to legal irregularities related to psychiatric information he provided without being warned of the consequences. In 1987, he was retried and sentenced to death again. He was finally executed by lethal injection on March 30, 1999, at the Huntsville unit, age 61. His last meal included hamburgers, French fries, and onion rings. He refused to make a final statement, but before dying, he said, "Send me to my maker, Director." His accomplices received lesser sentences. James Livingston life imprisonment and Gary Livingston 30 years in prison. Alvaro Calambro, State, Nevada. On January 3, 1994, Alvaro Calambro, 25 years old, and his accomplice Duke Konghuin robbed a U-Haul company office in Reno. During the robbery, they beat 2 employees, Peggy Crawford, 31, and Keith Christopher, 25, with a hammer and a crowbar. Both died from multiple blows and skull fractures. The assailants fled with $2,400 from the cash register. Calambro, a Filipino citizen who had lived in the United States since childhood, and Huyn were arrested shortly after. At their 1994 trial, both refused to appeal. Huyn was found guilty and sentenced to death, but he committed suicide in prison before his execution. Calambro also received the death penalty after confessing and waiving all appeals. On April 5, 1999, Nevada carried out the execution of Alvaro Calambro by lethal injection at the Nevada State Prison in Carson City at age 25. It was the 8th execution in Nevada since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1979 and the first in 1999. Governor Kenny Gwin denied a last-minute stay requested by the Philippine government, which alleged violations of the Vienna Convention due to lack of notification to consular authorities. Marion Albert Pruitt, State, Arkansas. Marion Albert Pruitt, nicknamed the Mad Dog Killer, was born in 1949 in North Carolina and had an extensive criminal career. He was released in 1979 after serving a federal sentence for bank robbery and entered the Federal Witness Protection Program in New Mexico under a false identity. In 1981, he began a crime spree that included robberies, kidnappings, and murders across several states. His victims included Pamela Sue Barker, murdered and burned in New Mexico, Peggy Lowe, shot in the back of the head in Mississippi, and James Balderson and Anthony Tate, killed in Colorado. In October 1981, in Fort Smith, Arkansas, Pruitt robbed and murdered Bobby Jean Robertson, a convenience store employee, shooting her multiple times after kidnapping her. He was arrested shortly afterward in Texas, confessed to multiple crimes, and was tried in Arkansas, where he was sentenced to death in 1982. He also received sentences for other murders in different states, including the death penalty in Mississippi and several life sentences. Pruitt spent nearly 17 years on death row, facing multiple appeals. In 1997, his Arkansas conviction was overturned due to lack of a fair trial caused by publicity, but the sentence was reinstated in 1998. During incarceration, he attempted to profit financially by offering information about items and victims in exchange for money or TV appearances, but these offers were rejected. He was finally executed by lethal injection on April 12, 1999, in Arkansas at age 49. He was the 532nd person executed in the U.S. since 1976, and the 19th in Arkansas since the reinstatement of the death penalty. His last meal was very large and included Pizza Hut pizza, 4 Burger King Whopper hamburgers, a large order of French fries, 3 2-liter bottles of Pepsi, a bucket of ice, a bottle of ketchup, salt, fried eggplant, fried zucchini, fried okra, and a pecan pie. Pruitt's last words are not specifically documented in available sources. He was pronounced dead shortly after midnight on April 13, 1999. Karl Hamilton Chichester, State, Virginia. On August 16, 1991, Karl Hamilton Chichester, 28, and his accomplice Sheldon Morris McDowell committed an armed robbery at a Little Caesars pizza restaurant in Manassas, Virginia, which ended with the murder of the store manager, 30-year-old Timothy Allen Rigney. Both masked and armed robbers entered the restaurant during the night shift. One of them jumped over the counter to take money from the cash registers. When Rigney failed to open one of the registers quickly enough, one of the men shot him in the chest, killing him instantly. The criminals fled immediately afterward. In 1993, Chichester was convicted in a 2-phase trial. He received life imprisonment for robbery, additional sentences for weapons offenses, and the death penalty for the murder, arguing he represented a future danger. Karl Hamilton Chichester was executed by lethal injection on April 13, 1999, at Greensville Correctional Center, Virginia, at age 36. His last words were, "I love my wife and my children." There is no documentation regarding his last meal. His accomplice, Sheldon McDowell, was sentenced to 71 years in prison but avoided the death penalty. Roy Ramsey, Jr., State, Missouri. On November 21, 1988, Roy Ramsey, Jr., 35 years old, along with his younger brother Billy Ramsey, committed the brutal robbery murder of an elderly couple, Garnett and Betty Ledford, at their home in Jackson County, Missouri. On the night of the crime, Roy and Billy, with the help of Billy's girlfriend as the driver, broke into the Ledfords' home armed with the intent to rob. After forcing the couple upstairs, Betty was forced to open the safe and then tied to a chair. While Billy went downstairs with money, weapons, and valuables, Roy shot both spouses in the head at point-blank range, killing them. Shortly after, the Ramseys were arrested. Billy struck a deal with prosecutors. He testified against his brother in exchange for a 25-year sentence. Roy was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, robbery, and use of a firearm. The jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death. During the trial, the prosecutor repeatedly nicknamed him Rambo, a move considered by many to be inflammatory and prejudicial. Despite state and federal appeals, Roy's sentence was upheld. Roy Ramsey Jr. was executed by lethal injection on April 14, 1999, at Potosi Correctional Center, Missouri, at age 45. No details about his last meal or last words are known. He was pronounced dead at 12:04 a.m. Arthur Ray Jenkins III. State, Virginia. On October 12, 1990, Arthur Ray Jenkins III, 22 years old, committed the brutal murder of his uncle Floyd Jenkins and Lee H. Brinklow at the house where he lived with them in Warren County, Virginia. After a night of drinking and violence, Jenkins argued with Brinklow, shot him in the face, and then shot his uncle in the head. Neither wound was immediately fatal. Jenkins returned with a kitchen knife and stabbed his uncle 7 times before finishing him off with another gunshot, also killing Brinklow with the second shot. He was arrested the next day and faced 8 charges, including 2 counts of capital murder, robbery, and use of firearms. In 1991, a jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death. His background included mental health issues, a low IQ, 65, and violent behavior in prison, where he was found with weapons and assaulted guards. On April 20, 1999, Arthur Ray Jenkins III was executed by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center, Virginia, at age 29. Jenkins' last meal consisted of pepper steak, macaroni and cheese, apple pie, and tea. His last words were difficult to understand according to prison officials, but they believed he asked for forgiveness. A prison spokesperson said, "Forgive me for my sins." No family or friends were present. The execution was carried out by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center. Jenkins was pronounced dead at 9:05 p.m. Ralph Edward Davis. State, Missouri. In 1986, at 48 years old, Ralph E. Davis fatally shot his estranged wife, 35-year-old Susan Davis, in Columbia, Missouri. This became the first case in Missouri to be prosecuted using DNA analysis. Although Susan's body was never found, Davis was convicted and sentenced to death based on circumstantial and forensic evidence. On June 9, 1986, Susan disappeared after leaving work. Weeks before, she had reported her husband for abuse. That same day, Ralph purchased a shotgun. Though he claimed to have no knowledge of his wife's whereabouts, in March 1988, his car was found hidden in a storage unit he rented, with forensic evidence indicating a violent murder. It was discovered that Davis had forged checks and documents to collect Susan's life insurance and filed for divorce shortly after her disappearance. He lied to authorities for nearly 2 years until he was arrested and charged with murder. The trial began in March 1989, and due to poor defense strategy, the charges were upgraded from second-degree to first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. On April 24, 1989, Davis was found guilty of first-degree murder, and the jury recommended the death penalty. The court upheld the sentence, and Davis was sentenced to death. Ralph E. Davis was executed by lethal injection at the Potosi Correctional Center in Mineral Point, Missouri, at age 61 on April 28, 1999. His last words were a written message to his son and daughter-in-law. "My body is gone, but my spirit is with you. I am just going to sleep. I love you, Dad." Aaron Christopher Foust. State, Texas. On May 18, 1997, Aaron Foust recently released from prison, and his accomplice Jamal Brown visited hospital executive David Ward at his apartment in Fort Worth, Texas. Foust demanded $500 that Ward supposedly owed him for drugs. When Ward refused, Foust tied him up with cables and brutally strangled him. During the murder, Brown stole electronic equipment and other valuables from the apartment. After the crime, they spray-painted graffiti to make it look like a gang attack and fled in Ward's BMW, which they later set on fire in Arlington. On April 17, 1998, Aaron Christopher Foust was sentenced to death. Jamal Brown was later convicted of robbery and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Shortly after his sentencing in May 1998, Foust voluntarily waived his right to appeal. In an interview from death row shortly before his execution, he openly expressed his desire not to spend the rest of his life in prison, stating, "I'm guilty. I did it." He said he didn't want to live without freedom or female companionship, and requested to expedite his execution by personally writing to the judge and his lawyer. Foust was executed by lethal injection on April 28, 1999, in Huntsville, Texas, at just 26 years old. He spent only 376 days on death row, an unusually short time compared to the Texas average of 11 years. His execution took place just 101 weeks after the crime, making it one of the fastest in the state's capital punishment system. He was the 10th person executed in Texas that year. His last meal consisted of a cheeseburger, fries, and a Coca-Cola. When asked if he had any last words, Aaron said, "Goodbye, friends. I'll see you on the other side. That's all. I'm ready when you are." Eric Christopher Payne. State, Virginia. In June 1997, 24-year-old Eric Christopher Payne carried out a series of extremely violent attacks in the Richmond, Virginia area, just 5 months after being released from prison for drug offenses. His first victim was Ruth Parham, a 61-year-old cleaning worker whom he followed to an office building in Hanover County. There, he attacked her with a 22-ounce hammer, repeatedly striking her head while sexually assaulting her. Despite the brutality, Payne did not rape her because he said he didn't find her attractive. After the crime, he cleaned up evidence and looked for other potential victims in the building before fleeing. Days later, on June 11th, Payne attacked Ridley Fleck and his 8-year-old son outside a movie theater with the same hammer, leaving them seriously injured. That same night, he broke into the home of 57-year-old Sally Fazio, whom he tricked into letting him use the phone. Once inside, he brutally beat and raped her, then ransacked her house. As he was about to leave, noticing Fazio was still alive, he struck her several more times in the head and chest to make sure she died. These crimes showed extreme violence and a deliberate intent to cause pain, abuse, and death. Eric Christopher Payne was arrested and prosecuted for the brutal murders of Ruth Parham and Sally Fazio. He was executed by lethal injection on April 28, 1999, at Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia. He was 26 years old. When asked if he had any last words, he said, "I love you, Margie. We'll be together again," addressing his wife, Margaret Dalton Payne. Ronald Dale Yates. State, Virginia. On September 23, 1989, 28-year-old Ronald Dale Yates brutally murdered 70-year-old Ruby Meeks Dodson during a robbery at her rural home in Pittsylvania County, Virginia. Alongside his accomplice, Charles Michael Vernon, with whom he had been using alcohol, marijuana, and crack, Yates planned the crime after asking if Vernon knew anyone with money. Vernon suggested Dodson, since her family had worked in the house before and knew she kept cash. Once there, Yates gained entry by pretending to have car trouble, then stabbed Dodson multiple times and slit her throat while Vernon searched the house for money. After the crime, they tried to destroy evidence by throwing Dodson's purse and the weapon into a river. Authorities found Dodson's body that same afternoon and quickly launched an investigation. Blood evidence, Vernon's testimony, who cooperated in exchange for a 20-year sentence, and confessions Yates made to police and his sister-in-law directly linked him to the murder. The jury recommended the death penalty based on his future dangerousness, and in December 1990, he was formally sentenced to death. Ronald Dale Yates was executed by lethal injection on April 29, 1999. at Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia, at age 38. Yates made no final statement before his execution. Manuel Pina Babbitt, State, California. On the night of December 18, 1980, Manuel Pina Babbitt, a Vietnam War veteran with a history of mental health issues, broke into the apartment of 78-year-old Leah Schendel in Sacramento, California. During an attempted rape and robbery, Babbitt brutally beat her, causing a fatal heart attack. Forensic evidence, including fingerprints and stolen items found in Babbitt's possession, directly linked him to the crime. The next day, he violently attacked another woman, Mavis W., leaving her unconscious and semi-naked after an attempted sexual assault and robbery. The police solved the case when Babbitt's own brother, Bill, turned him in after suspecting his involvement upon finding stolen items at his house. Bill believed his brother needed psychiatric help, as Manny had previously been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and paranoid schizophrenia following his service in Vietnam, particularly during the traumatic Battle of Khe Sanh. However, during the trial, the defense attorney failed to properly present this information. Despite medical diagnoses and testimony, the jury never heard convincing evidence about Babbitt's mental state. In 1982, Babbitt was found guilty of first-degree murder. In March 1998, while on death row, Babbitt was awarded the Purple Heart for wounds he received 30 years earlier in the Vietnam War. His case became a cause célèbre among many Vietnam veterans, especially Marines who, like Babbitt, survived the siege of Khe Sanh. Manuel Pina Babbitt was executed by lethal injection on May 4, 1999, at San Quentin State Prison, one day after his 50th birthday. He was visited by family and friends during his final hours. He refused a last meal and requested that the $50 allotted for it be donated to homeless Vietnam veterans. His case sparked controversy due to the inadequate consideration of his PTSD history during trial. The execution took place in San Quentin's death chamber. The injection began at 12:29 a.m. on May 4, 1999, and Babbitt was pronounced dead at 12:37 a.m. When asked if he had any last words, he said, "I forgive all of you." Jose Eligio de la Cruz, State, Texas. On June 1, 1987, 19-year-old Jose Eligio de la Cruz brutally murdered 24-year-old Domingo Rosas, who had a severe disability, in his apartment in Corpus Christi, Texas. De la Cruz stabbed Rosas 6 times and broke his neck during a robbery, taking advantage of his vulnerability. He stole several electronic items and personal documents, which he later sold for just $80. He was arrested days later while trying to withdraw money from Rosas's bank account using his ID. De la Cruz was convicted of capital murder in June 1988 and sentenced to death. Although he initially refused to appeal, he later filed legal challenges but requested in 1998 that no further appeals be made. In interviews from death row, he admitted his guilt and expressed remorse. He revealed he had been addicted to inhaling paint since he was 10, which contributed to his criminal behavior. He was executed by lethal injection on May 4, 1999, at the Huntsville unit in Texas, at age 31. He made no final statement nor requested a last meal, and no family members were present during his last moments. His case drew attention because he voluntarily waived his appeals, effectively becoming a volunteer for execution according to authorities. Robert Wayne Vickers, State, Arizona. Robert Wayne Vickers, known as Bonsai Bob, was sentenced to death for brutally murdering his cellmate Frank Ponciano in 1978, while serving time for multiple robberies. Vickers strangled and stabbed Ponciano with a sharpened toothbrush after Ponciano drank his Kool-Aid, then carved his nickname into the victim's back. Later, in 1982, he killed another inmate, Wilmar Holsinger, by setting him on fire with an improvised incendiary bomb following a personal dispute. This second murder resulted in a new death sentence. During more than 20 years on death row, Vickers was known for extreme violence, making improvised weapons, attacking guards and fellow inmates, and even attempting a dramatic escape. His medical history included epilepsy and possible brain damage, which his defense used to argue that the prison system had created the monster he became. However, he was found fully responsible for both murders and remains the only Arizona inmate sentenced to death for killing another prisoner. Vickers was executed by lethal injection on May 5, 1999, at age 41, at Florence State Prison in Arizona. He made no final statement, and no information is available about his last meal. Clydell Coleman. State: Texas. Clydell Coleman, 62, was executed in Texas on May 5, 1999, for the brutal murder of 87-year-old Letitia Joe. In 1989, he struck her with a hammer and strangled her during a robbery at her home in Waco. Coleman had known the victim since childhood and, according to witnesses, had planned the crime to steal money and valuables, which he later sold to buy drugs. His accomplice, Yolanda Phillips, who testified against him, revealed that they both entered the home intending to rob it, and that Coleman was the one who killed Joe. Coleman had a long criminal history, including several robbery convictions dating back to the 1950s. He had been released on parole just 2 years before the crime. During his trial, he tried to blame Phillips, but he was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. His daughter, who hadn't spoken to him in years, denied his guilt and said he requested no family members attend his execution to spare them further pain. Clydell Coleman was executed by lethal injection on May 5, 1999. The execution at the Huntsville unit proceeded without complications. He made no final statement, and no last meal is known. The victim's family and Coleman's spiritual advisor attended the execution. Edward Lee Harper, Jr., State, Kentucky. On February 19, 1982, 33-year-old Edward Lee Harper, Jr. shot and killed his adoptive parents in Louisville, Kentucky, intending to collect a life insurance policy worth over $86,000 and inherit an additional $250,000 from the family estate. Harper had lost his job months earlier and carefully planned the crime, even purchasing a .38 revolver under a false name on the day of the murders. After the killings, he tried to stage a robbery and discarded the weapon in a river. Harper was identified by the gun seller and confessed to the crime. He was charged with capital murder and tried. His defense argued he suffered from schizophrenia and heard voices compelling him to kill, but he was found guilty in October 1982 and sentenced to death. During more than 16 years on death row, Harper waived his appeals and expressed a desire to be executed. On May 25, 1999, Harper was executed by lethal injection in Kentucky, becoming the first inmate in the state executed by this method. His last words included an apology to his mother's family and a farewell to his son. His last meal consisted of bacon sandwiches, fries, and pecan pie. A post-execution autopsy suggested he may have been conscious during the execution due to low levels of sedatives in his system. Jesse Lee Wise. State, Missouri. On August 27, 1988, 35-year-old Jesse Lee Wise brutally murdered 49-year-old Geraldine Rose McDonald by hitting her on the head with a pipe wrench inside her condominium in Clayton, Missouri. McDonald had refused to pay him $30 up front to wash her BMW, which triggered the attack. Wise stole jewelry, money, and the vehicle, returned days later to take more valuables, and traded some of the loot for drugs. The crime was discovered by McDonald's family 2 days later amid a bloody scene. Police found key evidence in Wise's apartment, and he eventually confessed. Wise had a criminal history. At 18 years old, in 1972, he pled guilty to murdering Ralph Giannino, a contractor and father of 6. He was sentenced to life imprisonment but was released on parole after serving only 12 years. The murder of MacDonald occurred just 4 years after his release. Wise was convicted of first-degree murder and other charges and sentenced to death in March 1991. The prosecution highlighted the brutality of the crime and his recidivism as aggravating factors. His last meal before execution consisted of fish fillet and shrimp. Jesse Lee Wise was executed by lethal injection in Missouri on May 26, 1999, at age 46. It was the 6th execution in the state that year. Witnesses included family members of both victims, including the widow and son of Wise's first murder victim. In his final words, he said goodbye to a reverend who had accompanied him in his last years. "Carol, I love you. Remember me." William Hamilton Little. State: Texas. In the early morning of December 3, 1983, 23-year-old William Hamilton Little brutally raped and stabbed 28-year-old Marilyn Peter in her home in Cleveland, Texas, following an argument over marijuana. Peter was stabbed 19 times and suffered a post-mortem sexual assault. The crime occurred in the presence of Peter's 2-year-old son, who was found unharmed by 2 technicians who came to install a dryer and discovered the bloody scene. Although money and jewelry were in plain sight, Little did not steal anything. Little was arrested 3 days later. In his confession, he claimed the sex was consensual and that he acted in self-defense after being attacked with a knife. However, forensic evidence and his bloody fingerprint on the front door linked him to the murder. A second man also confessed to the crime, but was dismissed as a suspect after being declared mentally incompetent and due to DNA evidence that confirmed Little as the perpetrator. William Hamilton Little was sentenced to death in 1985. His appeals were denied, partly because the second suspect's confession was deemed invalid. He was executed by lethal injection on June 1, 1999, at the Huntsville unit in Texas, at age 38. He made no public final statement, though privately, he quietly expressed jealousy of those who went before him, saying they got to go home while he had to stay. Scotty Lee Moore. State: Oklahoma. On November 18, 1983, 26-year-old Scotty Lee Moore murdered 42-year-old Alex Fernandez by shooting him 5 times in the back of the head during a robbery at the Airline Motel in Oklahoma City. The crime was motivated by revenge, as Fernandez had fired Moore a month earlier. Moore and his partner and first cousin, Vicky Castor, had stolen a .22 caliber rifle days earlier, which Moore used in the killing. After the murder, the couple fled to Texas, where they were arrested on November 23rd. Castor was granted immunity and testified against Moore, who was sentenced to death by a jury in 1984 under prosecutor Bob Macy. The case became notorious for poor legal defense. Moore's attorney failed to present a closing argument, and the jury never learned about Moore's history of depression, brain injury, substance abuse, and a suicide attempt. While in prison, Moore became an advocate for the rights of other death row inmates, helping expose cases like Ronald Williamson's, who was exonerated in 1999 through DNA evidence. Moore was executed by lethal injection on June 3, 1999. Bruce W. Kilgore. State: Missouri. Bruce W. Kilgore, 25, took part on the night of August 27, 1986, in the kidnapping and murder of 54-year-old Marilyn Wilkins after she left her job at Christos Restaurant in St. Louis, Missouri. The crime stemmed from Kilgore's accomplice, Willie Luckett, being fired for theft following a report by the victim. That night, Luckett and Kilgore intercepted Wilkins, forced her into a car, and took her to Kinloch, where she was stabbed to death. Although the prosecution initially pointed to Luckett as the main perpetrator during the trial's first phase, during sentencing they presented last-minute testimony from Renee Dickerson, Luckett's girlfriend, who claimed for the first time that Kilgore was the attacker. This testimony, obtained through a plea deal, was the only direct evidence implicating Kilgore in the stabbing. In 1987, Kilgore was found guilty of first-degree murder, robbery, and kidnapping, and sentenced to death along with 2 life sentences, while Luckett received only life imprisonment. While on death row, Kilgore participated in the Youth Enlightenment Program, advising at-risk youth. His defense maintained until the end that he did not know the victim and that Luckett confessed to other inmates that he was the real killer. Despite questions about the sentencing disparity and the reliability of the key testimony, Kilgore was executed by lethal injection on June 16, 1999, at Potosi Correctional Center, aged 38, marking the 549th execution in the U.S. since 1976. Michael Kent Poland. State: Arizona. Michael Kent Poland, 36, and his brother Patrick disguised themselves as highway patrol officers on May 24, 1977, to stop a Purolator armored truck on Interstate 17 near Phoenix, Arizona. After kidnapping guards Russell Dempsey and Cecil Newkirk, they stole nearly $300,000 and took the men to Lake Mead, where they placed them alive into canvas bags weighted with rocks and dumped them into the water. The bodies were recovered 3 weeks later, and evidence, including the bags, weapons, badges, and money trail, led to the brothers' arrest. Sentenced to death in 1980, their sentences were overturned in 1982 due to jury misconduct, but they were retried in 1983, again convicted and sentenced to death. In his final years, Michael's defense argued he was mentally incompetent for execution, citing delusions, but courts disagreed. On June 16, 1999, at age 58, he was executed by lethal injection in Florence, Arizona, after more than 16 years on death row. His children witnessed the execution, to whom he silently said, "I love you." His last meal the day before included fried eggs, bacon, hash browns, toast, cereal, milk, and coffee. When asked for last words, Michael replied sarcastically, "I'd like to know if they're going to bring me lunch afterward. I'm really hungry. I can't think of anything else." Joseph Stanley Falder. State: Texas. Joseph Stanley Falder, a Canadian from Jasper, Alberta, was executed in Texas on June 17, 1999, for the 1975 murder of 75-year-old Inez Phillips during a robbery. The crime was planned after Falder boasted about his expertise in cracking safes and learned from an accomplice about a safe in the victim's home. According to Linda McCann, his partner in the assault, Falder struck Phillips with a baton and then stabbed her with a butcher knife. However, there was no physical evidence linking him to the murder. His conviction relied on a confession obtained after days of interrogation without access to a lawyer and on McCann's testimony, who received financial benefits and immunity for implicating him. His initial conviction was overturned in 1979 due to illegally obtained evidence, but a retrial in 1981 again sentenced him to death, driven by private prosecutors hired by the victim's son. During appeals, evidence surfaced of irregularities, suppression of information implicating another accomplice, lack of consular assistance violating the Vienna Convention, and later diagnoses revealing childhood brain damage that may have affected his behavior. Despite protests from the Canadian government, Amnesty International, and then Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, Governor George W. Bush denied clemency. Falder spent 22 years on death row, survived 9 execution dates, and became the first Canadian citizen executed in the U.S. since 1952. Brian Keith Baldwin. State: Alabama. Brian Keith Baldwin, 18, escaped in March 1977 from a juvenile facility in North Carolina with Edward Dean Horsley Jr., starting a spree that ended with the kidnapping and murder of 16-year-old Naomi Rowland after 40 hours in captivity. He was arrested in Alabama and charged with robbery during which the victim was killed, a capital offense. Baldwin confessed in custody, but later said he did so out of fear after being beaten, threatened, and subjected to electric shocks. Years later, a former agent and ex-inmates supported his claims of abuse. In 1985, Horsley wrote a letter taking full responsibility for the murder and stating Baldwin was not present during the crime. Additionally, forensic evidence omitted at trial indicated Baldwin had no blood traces, unlike Horsley, and the fatal attack was likely committed by a left-handed person, while Baldwin was right-handed. Despite these doubts, Baldwin was convicted and sentenced to death in 2 trials, 1977 and 1983, amid irregularities, racial prejudice, and conflicts of interest, as the same judge oversaw both trials and appeals. He spent over 22 years on death row, earning degrees and editing an abolitionist newsletter. Figures like Jimmy Carter called for clemency, citing doubts about his guilt and racial bias, but Governor Don Siegelman denied it. Baldwin was executed in the electric chair on June 18, 1999, at Holman Prison, Alabama. His last words were inaudible, and no record of his last meal exists. Charles Daniel Tuttle, State, Texas. In February 1995, 30-year-old Charles Daniel Tuttle brutally murdered 42-year-old Catherine Harris in her mobile home in Tyler, Texas. Harris, the aunt of his friend David Landry, had offered them temporary shelter while they looked for work. Although both found jobs, Landry began contributing financially to the household, while Tuttle spent his earnings on excesses. After being warned he would have to move out, Tuttle started sleeping in his truck but would return in the mornings to eat and shower. On February 24th, influenced by the movie Natural Born Killers and under the influence of methamphetamine, he attacked Harris with a hammer, striking her 10 times in the head before stealing her money, credit cards, and her truck. He hid her body in a closet where Landry found it the next day. Tuttle was arrested on February 28th in Beaumont in possession of the victim's belongings. He confessed to the crime in tears and requested the death penalty. In February 1996, he was convicted of capital murder and smiled when hearing the sentence, "That's what I want, eye for an eye." He voluntarily waived his appeals and asked to expedite his execution. On July 1, 1999, at age 35, he was executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas. In his final words, he apologized to Harris's family, expressed love to his own loved ones, and left a message of comfort before dying. His last meal included eggs, sausage patties, fried chicken steak, bacon, pancakes, potatoes with onions, white gravy, toast, grape juice, and whole milk. His last words before execution were, "I am truly sorry," he said. "I hope dropping my appeals has in some way began your healing process. This is all I can do to help you out in any way for the nightmare and pain I have caused you. I am truly sorry and wish I could take back what I did, but I can't. I hope this heals you." Tuttle then spoke to his own family, telling them he loved them and adding, "When the tears flow, let the smiles grow. Everything is all right." The lethal injection was then started. He was pronounced dead at 6:28 p.m. Gary Michael Heidnik, State, Pennsylvania. In November 1986, 43-year-old Gary Michael Heidnik kidnapped 25-year-old Josefina Rivera in Philadelphia, beginning a series of crimes that became one of the most gruesome cases in Pennsylvania's history. Raised in an abusive environment and diagnosed with a personality disorder, Heidnik had amassed over $500,000 through investments made in the name of his church, while accumulating charges of kidnapping and sexual abuse. Between November 1986 and March 1987, he kidnapped 6 African American women, keeping them chained in a pit in his basement, where they were subjected to daily rape, physical torture, electric shocks, starvation, and extreme humiliation. 2 victims, Sandra Lindsay and Deborah Dudley, died from the abuse. Heidnik even dismembered and partially cannibalized Lindsay, mixing her flesh with dog food and feeding it to the survivors. On March 23, 1987, Rivera managed to escape and alerted the police, who rescued 3 women the following day and arrested Heidnik. In 1988, he was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and multiple charges of kidnapping, rape, and assault, and was sentenced to death. On July 6, 1999, at age 55, Heidnik was executed by lethal injection in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, becoming the 3rd and final person executed in the state. His last meal was cheese pizza and black coffee, and he refused to give any last words. Tyrone Leroy Fuller. State, Texas. In January 1988, 24-year-old Tyrone Leroy Fuller broke into the apartment of 26-year-old medical technologist Andrea Lee Duke in Paris, Texas, during a planned robbery. Finding her in bed, the victim was beaten, whipped with a cable, raped, and stabbed 44 times. One of the wounds severed her vocal cords, preventing her from calling for help. Despite this, she managed to crawl out of the apartment before dying at a neighbor's house. The investigation uncovered fingerprints, DNA, and physical evidence linking Fuller, marking one of the first cases in Texas to use DNA evidence to secure a capital murder conviction. In March 1989, he was found guilty and sentenced to death, with a history of violence and several prison escape attempts. On July 7, 1999, at age 35, Fuller was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit. Some sources report that his last meal was an omelet with bacon, ham, cheese, onions, and peppers, a cinnamon roll, 3 pieces of toast, and mixed fruit, though others say he declined a last meal. His final words were, "Yes, to my family, I love you. Please don't cry over my death or my life. Keep living as I want you to live. I bear no grudges against anyone. Just remember the light. I'm going to let this light shine. Remember to let the light shine." He then softly began singing "This Little Light of Mine" as the lethal injection was administered, and he was pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m., 8 minutes after the injection began. Alan Lee Davis. State, Florida. In May 1982, 37-year-old Alan Lee Davis broke into the home of his neighbor Nancy Weiler, who was 3 months pregnant, in Jacksonville, Florida, intending to rob her, but ended up brutally murdering Nancy and her daughters, Christina and Catherine. He struck Nancy more than 25 times with a .357 Magnum revolver, shot Christina twice in the face after tying her up, and when the younger daughter tried to escape, shot her in the back and crushed her skull. Davis was arrested with overwhelming evidence including fingerprints, ballistics, and his own testimony. In 1983, he was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder, with the jury unanimously recommending the death penalty. His record included armed robbery and violence, and he was on probation at the time of the crimes. On July 8, 1999, at age 54, Davis was executed by electrocution at the Florida State Prison, becoming the first person to be put to death using the new electric chair adapted for his 350-pound weight. His last meal included lobster tail, shrimp, clams, French fries, garlic bread, and root beer. He refused to give a final statement. The execution was controversial. He screamed twice before the shock, bled from the nose due to blood thinners, and suffered burns with blood visibly staining his shirt. Footage and testimony from the execution were described by a Florida Supreme Court justice as evidence of brutal torture, prompting the state to phase out electrocution as the primary execution method in favor of lethal injection. Thomas David Strickler, State, Virginia. In January 1990, 24-year-old Thomas David Strickler kidnapped 19-year-old college student Leanne Marion Whitlock from a shopping mall parking lot in Harrisonburg, Virginia. He took her to a secluded area in Augusta County, where he beat her to death with a 69-pound rock, crushing her skull. Strickler stole her belongings, including jewelry and documents, and attempted to use her bank card. Evidence against him included fingerprints, shoe impressions, witness testimony, and the victim's possessions in his possession. At trial, the jury found him guilty of capital murder, kidnapping, and robbery, citing the aggravating circumstances of future dangerousness and heinousness. Although his defense argued intellectual disability, and the U.S. Supreme Court later reviewed the failure to disclose exculpatory evidence, the conviction was upheld. On July 21, 1999, at age 33, Strickler was executed by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center without gubernatorial intervention. No special last meal was reported. His final words were, "I am innocent. I didn't do it. I hope everyone else finds the peace I have found, and to all my family I love you deeply. I will always be with them." He was pronounced dead at 9:05 p.m. Ricky Don Blackman, State, Texas. In March 1987, 29-year-old Ricky Don Blackman lived in extreme poverty with his girlfriend Donna Mae Rogers, sleeping in the back seat of an old Oldsmobile in Dallas, Texas. Desperate for money, they traveled to Shelby County with the intent to commit a robbery. When their initial plan failed, Rogers identified a target, 26-year-old Karl Joseph Wrinkle, an acquaintance. Driven by jealousy and rage upon seeing Wrinkle naked with Rogers, Blackman, dressed in a black ninja outfit, broke into Wrinkle's home armed with a homemade 3-foot steel sword and a hunting knife. He slashed his skull and throat and stabbed him 21 times in the back, leaving the body mutilated, according to the prosecutor. He then stole money, jewelry, a gun, and the victim's truck. Arrested days later, he confessed, and during trial, evidence of his involvement in a 1985 double murder contributed to his death sentence. Blackman, the son of a preacher who had rejected his faith in youth, experienced a religious conversion while on death row, studying the Bible with ministers. He was executed by lethal injection on August 4, 1999, at 6:22 p.m. at age 41, without intervention from Governor George W. Bush. He requested no last meal, only something to drink, and when asked for final words, he did not speak aloud but left a written statement. "Use it to teach others what not to do, and pray that God receives the glory, not me." During the injection, he sobbed, closed his eyes, and gasped twice before dying, with a tear running down his right cheek. The victim's mother, Thomasine Crow, witnessed the execution after meeting with him in a reconciliation process. Charles Anthony Boyd, State, Texas. In July 1986, 27-year-old Charles Anthony Boyd began a series of brutal murders that terrorized North Dallas for 9 months. The first occurred on July 22, 1986, when he attacked and killed 37-year-old Tipawan Nakusan, a waitress and Thai immigrant who lived in the same apartment complex as Boyd. Less than 2 months later, on September 15th, another woman, 22-year-old Leishun Chappell Thomas, was found stabbed in the bathroom of her apartment in the same complex, leading the press to dub the crimes the bathroom murders. Boyd moved, and on April 13, 1987, he committed his most violent killing. 21-year-old Mary Milligan was strangled, raped, and drowned in her bathtub. He stole her Cadillac and personal items and was arrested the following day after attempting to pawn some of them. With a history of sexual assault and robbery, Boyd had been released before serving half of his previous sentence. At trial, it was revealed that he had an IQ of 64 to 67 and a history of learning difficulties, abuse, and childhood health problems. He was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection on August 5, 1999, at Huntsville Unit, Texas, at age 39. He declined a last meal, and although he initially refused a final statement, as the injection began, he said, "I want everyone to know that I did not commit this crime. I requested a 30-day stay for DNA testing so they would know who committed the crime." 9 minutes later, he was pronounced dead without any reported complications during the procedure. Victor Kennedy, State, Alabama. In the early hours of December 24, 1980, 18-year-old Victor Kennedy broke into the home of 86-year-old widow Annie Laura Orr, who lived alone in Montevallo, Alabama, intending to commit a robbery. When he failed to find any money, he brutally beat her, raped her, and wrapped her head with a pillowcase and duct tape, causing her death by asphyxiation. Although there was no direct forensic evidence linking him to the rape, his own statements implicated him in the crime. Kennedy, with an IQ of 75 and a history of abuse and drug addiction, was found guilty of nighttime robbery with homicide and sentenced to death by electrocution. On August 6, 1999, at 12:11 a.m., Kennedy was executed in the electric chair at Holman Prison in Atmore, Alabama, at age 37. He did not request a special last meal, and when asked if he had anything to say, Kennedy remained silent. Kenneth Dwayne Dunn, State, Texas. In March 1980, 20-year-old Kenneth Dwayne Dunn committed a bank robbery in Houston that ended in murder when he shot and killed Madeline Smiley Peters, a distracted employee showing her wedding dress. After taking control of the bank and stealing about $12,000, Dunn fled but was captured and confessed to the crime. In 1987, his initial conviction was overturned due to record issues, and in a second trial he represented himself but was quickly found guilty and sentenced to death. During his time in prison, he displayed violent behavior and requested Michael and Janet Jackson as witnesses to his execution, claiming a conspiracy to exonerate him. On August 10, 1999, at age 39, Dunn was executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas. His execution was delayed nearly 90 minutes due to a last-minute appeal, which was denied. He did not request a last meal or make any final statement and was pronounced dead 6 minutes after the lethal injection began. James Otto Earhart, State, Texas. In May 1987, James Otto Earhart, a burly scrap metal worker from Bryan, Texas, kidnapped and murdered 9-year-old Candy Janelle Kirtland. After the girl disappeared following her return from the school bus, police tracked Earhart and found Candy's body buried in a pile of trash, showing signs of having been bound and shot in the head. Forensic evidence was overwhelming, and although Earhart denied the murder, he was convicted of capital murder in connection with kidnapping. In addition to this crime, years later, Earhart was linked via DNA to another 1981 murder. He was executed by lethal injection in August 1999 in Texas at age 56, without requesting a last meal or making any final statement. Marlon Dwayne Williams, State, Virginia. In November 1993, 20-year-old Marlon Dwayne Williams carried out a contract killing in Chesapeake, Virginia, when he murdered Helen Bedsole, the wife of Clark Bedsole, who had paid him to avoid the financial consequences of a divorce. Williams shot Helen twice in the head and neck while she was in her kitchen, and later bragged about the crime in recordings that helped secure his arrest. His childhood was marked by severe abuse and neglect, although these factors were not adequately considered during his trial. Williams pled guilty and was sentenced to death, while his accomplice Bedsole received a life sentence. Marlon Dwayne Williams was executed by lethal injection in August 1999 at age 26. He requested a special last meal, but details were not disclosed and no specific final words were recorded during his execution. Joe Mario Trevino, Jr., State, Texas. In January 1983, 20-year-old Joe Mario Trevino Jr. committed a brutal murder and rape of 80-year-old Blanche Miller in Haltom City, Texas. After breaking into Miller's home to steal, he violently attacked her when she tried to call for help, strangling her to death and later attempting to set fire to the house to destroy evidence. Police linked him to the crime through forensic evidence such as semen and fingerprints, and they also found that Trevino had a prior criminal record for theft. During his 1984 trial, with an all-white jury, Trevino denied committing the murder and suggested the possible involvement of another Hispanic man, though this did not change the verdict. He was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection in August 1999 at age 36. His last meal was fried chicken with sides, and he declined to make a final statement. David Leisure. State, Missouri. In September 1980, David Leisure, along with his cousin Paul and brother Anthony, orchestrated the bombing murder of James Horseshoe Jimmy Michael Sr., a leader of a rival organized crime faction in St. Louis. This attack sparked a violent gang war that affected the city for years. FBI and ATF investigations linked Leisure to multiple organized crime-related offenses, including other bomb murders. He was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death in Arkansas due to pretrial publicity, maintaining his innocence until the end through appeals. David Leisure was executed by lethal injection on September 1, 1999, in Missouri at age 49. His execution was initially delayed, but later carried out without complications. His final words before being executed were, "I am innocent. The lawyer who represented me was on drugs. Tell my children, my family, and my relatives that I love them." Raymond James Jones. State, Texas. In June 1988, 28-year-old Raymond James Jones committed one of the most brutal murders in the history of Port Arthur, Texas. After playing dominoes with Sue Van Dang, a Vietnamese immigrant, Jones accompanied him to his home intending to steal his portable stereo. There, he repeatedly stabbed Dang, beat him with a meat cleaver and a wrench, and tried to drown him in the bathtub during a prolonged struggle. Afterwards, he tied Dang with a cable, locked him in a closet, doused the house with kerosene, and set it on fire to cover up the crime. Jones was quickly arrested after being identified by neighbors, and the police recovered the stolen stereo. He confessed to the murder and was tried for the crime. With a prior criminal record and being on probation, he was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection in September 1999 in Huntsville, Texas. Jones declined to make any final statements, and his last meal was a double cheeseburger with French fries. Mark Edward Gardner. State, Arkansas. In December 1985, 29-year-old Mark Edward Gardner broke into the Joyce family home in Fort Smith, Arkansas, seeking valuables to steal. When confronted by Joe Joyce, his wife Martha, and their daughter Sarah McCurdy, he bound, gagged, and strangled all three using ties, a belt, and a coat hanger, killing them. Sarah was also sexually assaulted. Gardner looted the home, taking jewelry, money, and other items, and was arrested the following day while attempting to sell part of the loot at a pawn shop. In June 1986, he was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. Mark Edward Gardner was executed by lethal injection on September 8, 1999, at Varner Correctional Center, Arkansas, at age 43. That night, the state carried out 2 executions, with Gardner going first due to his lower inmate number. His last meal consisted of fried shrimp, grilled salmon, garden salad, chocolate cake, and a Coca-Cola. His final words were, "Blessed are those who are called to the supper of the Lord. An endless feast awaits me. I love Melanie Alberson's family and thank them very much. Willis J. Barnes. State, Texas." In February 1988, Willis J. Barnes, a career criminal on probation after serving only 3 years of a 30-year sentence for theft, broke into the home of 84-year-old Helen Greb in Houston, Texas. Barnes forced open a kitchen window and, during the assault, brutally beat her, sexually assaulted her, fractured her spine and all her ribs, crushed her chest, and then strangled her. 3 days later, her naked body was found by relatives in a ransacked home, with the telephone cord cut. Investigators traced a stolen television and 2 firearms to a known fence who identified Barnes. The jury rejected his claim of self-defense, and in March 1989 he was sentenced to death for capital murder. Willis J. Barnes was executed by lethal injection on September 10, 1999, at age 51 at the Huntsville unit, marking the 100th execution under Governor George W. Bush's tenure, a fact that drew national attention during his presidential campaign. His last meal was a T-bone steak, baked potato, green salad, banana nut ice cream, and a Coca-Cola. Minutes before his execution, his final words were, "Yes, I would like to send love to my mother, my family, and my friends. To the victim's family, I hope you find the strength in your heart to forgive me as I have forgiven you. I am ready, Warden." William Prince Davis. State, Texas. In June 1978, 21-year-old William Prince Davis armed himself and broke into the offices of Red Wing Ice Cream Carmer in Houston, Texas, where manager Richard Lang, 60, was closing the business with his son and other employees. Without provocation, Davis shot Lang in the chest with a .32 caliber pistol, killing him instantly, and fled with over $700 and a shotgun. A week later, he attempted to rob the same location again but was arrested and confessed, though he claimed the victim made a move toward him, a version contradicted by witnesses. With a lifelong criminal record, he was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death in September 1978. After spending 21 years on death row, Davis converted to Christianity and became a Dallas Cowboys fan. He was executed by lethal injection on September 14, 1999, at age 42. He requested fried chicken and chili with cheese as his last meal, but declined to eat. His final words were, "I would like to thank Almighty God, by whose grace I am saved through His Son, Jesus Christ, without whom I am nothing. I want to tell the family how truly sorry I am in my soul, and the depths of my heart for the pain and misery I have caused by my actions. I pray they may find it in their hearts to forgive me. I would like to thank all the men on death row who have shown me love over the years. I hope that by donating my body to science, some parts may be used to help someone. That is all I have to say, Warden. Oh, and I would like to say, in conclusion, what about those cowboys? Everett Lee Muller. State, Virginia. In October 1990, 42-year-old Everett Lee Muller kidnapped and murdered 10-year-old Charity Powers in Chesterfield County, Virginia. The girl had gone to a skating rink and was last seen at a nearby restaurant. Witnesses described a man matching Mueller's description driving a vehicle similar to his. Days later, Mueller admitted speaking with the girl that night. In February 1991, police found Charity's body buried near Mueller's home, along with a knife. During interrogations, Mueller confessed that he took her to his property and then killed her for fear she would report him. He later buried the body and destroyed some of her belongings. Mueller, who had prior sexual offense convictions, was found guilty of kidnapping, rape, and 2 counts of capital murder, receiving 2 life sentences and 2 death sentences. On September 16, 1999, at age 51, he was executed by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia. He declined a special last meal, and no final words were recorded. Richard Wayne Smith. State: Texas. On the night of December 3, 1992, 36-year-old Richard Wayne Smith, under the influence of drugs and alcohol, arrived at a stop-and-go store in Baytown, Texas, driving a stolen Jeep Cherokee. The store was staffed by 38-year-old Karen Berkey, a special education teacher who worked nights to buy materials for her students. Armed with a .32 caliber pistol, Smith stole less than $100 and forced Berkey into the parking lot. When she refused to comply with his attempted kidnapping, he shot her in the neck in front of 3 witnesses. Berkey managed to say she did not know her attacker before dying from blood loss en route to the hospital. Smith was arrested shortly afterward in his ex-wife's apartment complex parking lot with the weapon and stolen money. With an extensive criminal record and on probation, he was convicted based on overwhelming evidence, including video footage of the robbery. On September 21, 1999, at age 43, he was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit, having waived his appeals to die before advanced hepatitis C could claim his life. He requested no special last meal, and his final words were, "No, sir." Alvin Wayne Crane. State: Texas. On March 28, 1987, 28-year-old Alvin Wayne Crane killed 57-year-old Ochiltree County Deputy Sheriff Melvin Drum in Perryton, Texas. That morning, following an argument with his wife at the home of an elderly woman she cared for, Crane made repeated threatening calls to the residents. Hours later, Drum located and stopped him in front of the house, at which point Crane exited his vehicle armed with a shotgun and shot the officer in the face while he was seated in his patrol car. Crane fled but was arrested the same day in Oklahoma after surrendering to the local sheriff. At trial, the defense argued dementia and brain damage from a prior accident, but the jury convicted him of capital murder in November 1987 and sentenced him to death. Crane, with a history of violent offenses and on probation for another crime, narrowly avoided execution 9 years earlier due to a last-minute stay, but subsequent appeals failed. He was executed by lethal injection on October 12, 1999, at age 41, at the Huntsville unit, Texas. His last meal was fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, corn, cauliflower, and chocolate cake. In his final words, he apologized to the victim's family and expressed love to his own. While the lethal injection took effect, he smiled, waved to his family, and reassured them before dying 9 minutes later. His final statement was, "I would like to say a little. I just want to say, I am sorry to the family. I know I caused you a lot of pain and suffering, and I hope you can find some peace and comfort in this. If you have any anger, I hope you let it go. I'm sorry for causing everyone so much trouble. To my relatives, I love you, and God loves you too. Trust Him, and everything will be all right." To District Attorney Bruce Robertson and Ochiltree County Sheriff Joe Hadaway, I'm sorry, and you all treated me with respect. Jerry Walter McFadden. State: Texas. In May 1986, 38-year-old Jerry Walter McFadden, nicknamed The Animal, committed one of the most brutal crimes in East Texas history. He kidnapped 3 young people at Lake Hawkins: 18-year-old cheerleader Suzanne Harrison, 19-year-old Brian Boone, and 20-year-old Gina Turner. He raped and strangled Suzanne and shot Brian and Gina to death. McFadden was quickly arrested after being identified by witnesses and by ammunition found in his possession. He had a history of multiple sexual assaults and was on probation after serving less than 5 years of a 15-year sentence. While awaiting trial, McFadden staged a dramatic escape from Upshur County Jail in July 1986, holding 2 guards hostage, triggering the largest manhunt in Texas history at that time. He was captured 2 days later and sentenced to life for the escape, and later to death for the murders. Decades later, advances in genetic genealogy linked him to another unsolved murder in Oregon in 1979. McFadden was executed by lethal injection on October 14, 1999 at age 51. He declined to make a final statement. His last meal consisted of a BLT sandwich, French fries. Joseph Mitchell Parsons, State, Utah. In August 1987, Joseph Mitchell Parsons, 23, murdered 30-year-old construction worker Richard Lynn Ernest at a rest area near Cedar City, Utah. Parsons, who had prior convictions for armed robbery and was a fugitive from a halfway house in Nevada, was picked up hitchhiking by Ernest, who was traveling to Denver. During a nighttime stop, Parsons stabbed him at least 9 times, likely while he was asleep, dumped the body by the roadside, and used the victim's credit cards to purchase gas, food, and lodging. He was arrested later that same day in Ernest's car, and after pleading guilty, was sentenced to death in 1988. On October 15, 1999, at age 35, Parsons was executed by lethal injection at the Utah State Prison. His last meal, shared with his brother and cousin, included 3 Whoppers, French fries, a chocolate milkshake, chocolate chip ice cream, root beer, and grape bubble gum. His final words were, "Love to my family and friends," and Woody, the Rainbow Warrior rules, "Thank you," addressed to his friend and fellow death row inmate Doug Woody Lovell, using the term rainbow as a reference to the gay community and as a derogatory remark toward the victim. Jason Matthew Joseph, State, Virginia. In October 1992, Jason Matthew Joseph, 20, murdered 22-year-old Jeffrey Anderson during a robbery at a Subway restaurant in Portsmouth, Virginia. Raised solely by his mother and unemployed, he had spent the afternoon using marijuana and cocaine with his accomplice, Kiasi Powell, and relatives. Seeking money for more drugs, they decided to rob the Subway where Anderson was working alone. After ordering a sandwich and forcing him to open the cash register, Joseph told him to lie on the floor. When Anderson smiled, Joseph became enraged and shot him in the back, an act captured by the store's surveillance cameras. Arrested shortly afterward, he was sentenced to death in 1994, in addition to receiving life imprisonment and 100 more years for other prior offenses. On October 19, 1999, at age 27, Joseph was executed by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center, Virginia, without intervention from the governor, and with the U.S. Supreme Court rejecting a stay of execution that same day. His final words were, "No more pain." In a written statement, he expressed, "I hope the family and friends of the victim can finally find some closure and peace. I truly regret the pain that I have caused your family and mine. I have brought so much pain to so many people. All I can say to both families is, I wish you no more pain." Ignacio Alberto Ortiz, State, Arizona. On December 21, 1978, Ignacio Alberto Ortiz, 37, murdered 30-year-old Manuelita McCormack in her home in Pima County, Arizona, after attempting to rekindle an unreciprocated romantic relationship. After strangling and stabbing Manuelita in front of her 8-year-old daughter, Bernice, he also attacked Patricia, 9, and Bernice, stabbing them in the chest. Before leaving, he poured gasoline inside the house, left an incendiary device, and set the place on fire. The girls managed to escape along with their younger brother, Charlie. Arrested the next day, Ortiz was convicted of first-degree murder, attempted murder, aggravated assault, arson, burglary, and conspiracy to commit murder, after trying to hire another inmate to kill the surviving children and other family members. In 1979, he was sentenced to death and life imprisonment for the conspiracy, plus additional prison terms. On October 27, 1999, at age 57, Ortiz was executed by lethal injection at the Arizona State Prison after spending 21 years on death row and without intervention from the governor. His last meal included fried eggs with hot sauce, bacon, sirloin steak, French fries with ketchup, vanilla ice cream, milk, and coffee. His final words were, "Yes, I do. Jesus Christ is Lord," which he then repeated in Spanish, "Jesucristo es el Señor," concluding with, "Heavenly Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." He neither looked at nor apologized to the victims' relatives present, of whom only one daughter witnessed the execution. Domingo Cantu Jr., State, Texas. On June 25, 1988, Domingo Cantu Jr., 20, raped and murdered 94-year-old Suda Eller Jones while she was taking her morning walk outside her home in Dallas, Texas. After dragging her into a backyard, he raped her and repeatedly slammed her head against the sidewalk until she died. A neighbor witnessed part of the attack and called police, who arrested Cantu minutes later, covered in blood. Forensic evidence, including DNA, directly linked him to the crime, and it was proven that he had assaulted another woman hours earlier. He was sentenced to death in 1988. From prison, Cantu claimed innocence and alleged that his confession had been coerced, but all appeals were denied. On October 28, 1999, at age 31, Cantu was executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas, with his sister and wife present. His last meal, eaten just minutes before his death, included fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, corn, refried beans, buttered rolls, coleslaw, cheesecake, and iced tea. His final words were, in English, "I love you. I'll be waiting for you on the other side. Son, be strong no matter what. Know that God is taking care of you. Jesus mercy, Jesus mercy, Jesus mercy." He also spoke in German, "Menig schone Prinzessin. Du list all meine Herz and Seele, rind ich liebe dich so sehr," translated as, "My beautiful princess. You are all my heart and soul, and I love you very much." Thomas Lee Royal, Jr., State, Virginia. On February 21, 1994, Thomas Lee Royal, Jr., 26, murdered 29-year-old police officer Kenneth Earl Wallace in Hampton, Virginia, in retaliation for the arrest of his brother on drug charges. Royal and 3 accomplices, Yancey Michener, Willie Sanders, and Eldred Acklin, set out armed with the intention of killing a specific officer. But when they couldn't find him, they located Wallace in his patrol car. Even knowing he was not the original target, Royal shot him twice in the head at point-blank range. Wallace, a respected veteran with 7 years of service, died 4 days later. Royal pleaded guilty to capital murder without a plea agreement and was sentenced to death in 1994. On November 9, 1999, at age 32, Royal was executed by lethal injection at Greensville Correctional Center, Virginia. The U.S. Supreme Court and the governor declined to halt the execution. No details were found regarding his final meal or exact last words. His juvenile accomplices were sentenced to long prison terms but released in 2004, later reoffending. Leroy Joseph Drayton, State, South Carolina. In the early morning of February 11, 1984, Leroy Joseph Drayton, 28, kidnapped, robbed, and murdered 19-year-old Rhonda Darlene Smith while she was working as a cashier at a KO gas station in North Charleston, South Carolina. According to the official account, Drayton forced Smith into her fiancé's car, drove her around the area, and later returned to the station, where he shot her in the head at point-blank range with a .38 caliber revolver. The defense claimed they were dating and that the shooting was accidental, but eyewitness testimony and evidence of a subsequent robbery supported the charge of premeditated murder. Drayton was arrested 5 days later and although a mistrial forced a retrial, he was again sentenced to death in 1987. On November 12, 1999, at age 44, Drayton was executed by lethal injection at Broad River Correctional Institution after spending 15 years on death row. His last meal, served the morning before his death, included fried chicken, French fries, coleslaw, buttered rolls, and iced tea. His final words before dying were, "I want everyone to know I am right with God. I am very sorry for what happened to Rhonda Smith and her family. I'm very sorry. Desmond Dominique Jennings, State, Texas." Between October and December 1993, Desmond Dominique Jennings, 22, carried out a series of violent robberies at drug houses in Fort Worth, Texas, resulting in 6 victims, 4 of whom were killed. Among the most serious crimes were the murder of Larry Eugene Wilson, shot during a robbery on October 25th, the double homicide of Dino Andre Beasley and Charlotte Dickerson on December 24th, and 3 days later, the execution-style killings of Sylvester Walton and Wanda Matthews, both shot in the head. Jennings committed several of these crimes alongside John H. Freeman and was identified by witnesses and linked through ballistic evidence. In July 1995, he was sentenced to death, and all appeals were denied. On November 16, 1999, at age 28, Jennings was executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas. He refused to cooperate with the procedure, forcing guards to use pepper spray and physical force to move him, making him the first Texas inmate since 1982 to be forcibly taken to the execution chamber. He declined a final meal, and when asked by the warden if he had any last statement, his final words were, "No, I do not." John Michael Lamb, State, Texas. On November 6, 1982, John Michael Lamb, 25, murdered 30-year-old Virginia businessman Jerry Harrison Chafin in a Greenville, Texas motel. Recently released from an Arkansas jail the previous day, Lamb arrived in Texas by hitchhiking. According to his confession, he met Chafin in the parking lot, and after talking in Chaffin's room, Lamb retrieved a pistol from a bag while the victim was in the bathroom. Following a verbal exchange, he shot Chaffin 3 times, then stole his wallet and shaving kit. 5 days later, in Florida, Lamb committed an armed robbery and attempted to murder a gas station clerk by shooting her twice before being arrested shortly afterward. Sentenced to death in 1983, Lamb spent 16 years on death row before his execution. On November 17, 1999, at age 42, he was executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas. No official records were found regarding his last meal, though he would have been entitled to request one. His final words were, "I'm sorry, I wish I could bring them back. I'm done. Let's do it." Jose Angel Gutierrez, State, Texas. On September 5, 1989, Jose Angel Gutierrez, 29, murdered 42-year-old Dorothy McNew during a violent robbery at the Texas Coin Exchange, a jewelry store in College Station, Texas. Jose and his brother Jesse entered the store, and while Jesse looted the display cases, Jose shot McNew in the head without apparent provocation. The victim died the following day, while the brothers fled with jewelry valued at approximately $500,000. Police later tracked them to Houston through leads, where Jose was arrested in possession of stolen jewelry. Gutierrez was sentenced to death in February 1992 and executed by lethal injection on November 18, 1999, at the age of 39 in Huntsville, Texas. 3 family members witnessed the execution and prayed with him. His final words were sung as a hymn. "Mama Isabel told me to tell you hello. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. Early in the morning our song shall rise to thee. Holy, 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 merciful and mighty, God in 3 persons, blessed Trinity. Holy, 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 merciful and mighty. All thy works shall praise thy name in earth and sky and sea. Holy, 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 merciful and mighty. God in three persons, blessed Trinity. O, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever and ever. Now, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. Amen. Cornell Cooks. State, Oklahoma. In October 1982, Cornell Cooks, 26, raped, beat, and murdered 87-year-old Jenny Ridling during a home invasion in Lawton, Oklahoma. Cooks and his accomplice, Rodney Madsen Masters, forced their way into Ridling's mobile home, ransacked the residence, and brutally attacked her. Ridling died of suffocation after a piece of cloth was tightly wrapped around her head, following nearly 2 hours of suffering. Police collected evidence linking Cooks to the crime, including blood and items belonging to the victim. Masters was sentenced to life in prison, while Cooks received the death penalty. Cooks was executed by lethal injection on December 2, 1999, at 12:18 a.m. at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, at the age of 43. The governor did not intervene, and clemency was denied. Expressing remorse before his execution, his final words were, "God is in control. Thank you for my life. I pray for peace for my victim's family." David Rocheville. State, South Carolina. On January 7, 1991, when David Rocheville was 22, he murdered 19-year-old Alexander George Hops and 24-year-old James Todd Green during a robbery at the Westgate Mall Cinema in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Rocheville, along with his accomplice Richard Longworth, entered the theater intending to steal the box office cash. After confronting Hops and Green, Rocheville shot Hops in the head outside the theater, then forced Green into his vehicle and drove to a deserted road, where he executed him. At trial, Rocheville admitted to killing Green but claimed Longworth had coerced him. Prosecutors proved he was the mastermind behind the crime. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for Hops's murder and to death for Green's, with the South Carolina Supreme Court upholding the sentences on January 4, 1993. Rocheville was executed by lethal injection on December 3, 1999, at 6:08 p.m. at Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina, at the age of 31. His last meal consisted of steak, French fries, and Coca-Cola. He expressed remorse toward the victims' families, though his exact words were not recorded. David Martin Long. State, Texas. On September 27, 1986, David Martin Long, 33, murdered 3 women with an axe in Lancaster, Texas: Dalpha Jester, her daughter Donna Sue Jester, and Laura Lee Owens. Long had previously lived in California, where he had a history of drug and alcohol problems, and was raised in reform schools and prisons. After staying at the victim's home for house repairs, he attacked Laura Owens, then Donna and Dalpha Jester, returning to finish off Owens. After fleeing, Long was arrested years later in Austin, Texas, where he confessed to the murders and to other unrelated crimes. He was sentenced to death in February 1987, and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the sentence in December 1991. Long was executed by lethal injection on December 8, 1999, at 6:17 p.m. in Huntsville, Texas, at the age of 46. His final words were, sorry to all of you. I think I tried everything I could to get in touch with you to express how sorry I am. I was never right after that incident happened. I sent a letter to someone, a letter outlining how I feel about everything. But anyway, I just wanted to, right after that, apologize to you. I am really sorry. I was raised by the California Youth Authority. I really can't pinpoint where it started, what happened, but I really think that's the bottom line. What happened to me happened in California. I was in the reform schools and prisons, but they create monsters there. That's it. I have nothing else to say. Thanks for coming, Jack. Bobby Lynn Ross. State, Oklahoma. On January 5, 1983, Bobby Lynn Ross, 24, murdered 30-year-old Elk City Police Sergeant Stephen Leroy Mahan during an armed robbery at a motel in Elk City, Oklahoma. Ross, who had prior criminal history, and an accomplice robbed the night clerk before Mahan arrived for a routine inspection. Ross disarmed the officer, forced him to lie on the floor, and shot him 3 times in the head with a .25 caliber pistol. Following his arrest, ballistic evidence, stolen property, and his confession linked him to the crime. He was sentenced to death in October 1983, and all state and federal appeals upheld the sentence. On December 9, 1999, Ross was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester at the age of 41. Records of his last meal were not found. His final words were, "I would like to say, forgive me to the Mahan family. I'm going to ask you all to forgive me as the Lord has forgiven me. D. H. Fleenor, State, Indiana." On December 12, 1982, D. H. Fleenor, 31, murdered his in-laws, Bill Harlow, 58, and Nyla Harlow, 49, in their Madison, Indiana home. Earlier that day, he had purchased a .22 caliber pistol before shooting the Harlows in the head in front of their daughter and 3 grandchildren. He then forced his wife, Sandra Saddam, and the children to help move the bodies and fled with them to Tennessee, where he was arrested. Fleenor pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, but was convicted on December 1, 1983, of 2 counts of murder and 1 count of burglary, receiving the death penalty under 3 aggravating factors: double murder, stalking, and intentional murder during the commission of a felony. Fleenor was executed by lethal injection on December 9, 1999, at the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City, aged 48, with no intervention from the governor. He declined to request a last meal, and his final words were, "I am not guilty." James Lee Baythard. State, Texas. On October 9, 1984, 27-year-old James Lee Baythard was implicated in the murder of 45-year-old Gene Hathorn Sr., 34-year-old Linda Sue Hathorn, and 14-year-old Marcus Lee Hathorn in Groveton, Texas. Although Baythard was charged and convicted for the murder of Marcus Hathorn, later evidence showed that he had neither fired a weapon nor actively participated in the killings. Gene Hathorn Jr., the co-perpetrator of the crime, initially testified against him but later recanted, stating, "Because James Baythard is an innocent man." Despite this recantation, a motion for a new trial was denied for being filed too late, and the court never evaluated the merits of this new testimony. James Lee Baythard was executed by lethal injection on December 9, 1999, in Huntsville, Texas, at the age of 42, without intervention from Governor George W. Bush. His last meal consisted of fried breaded fish, fried chicken, French fries, onion rings, green salad, fresh carrots, and a Coca-Cola. His final words were extensive and covered several topics. A couple of matters I want to address since this is one of the few times people will hear what I have to say. The United States has reached a point where there is now zero respect for human life. My death is just a symptom of a bigger illness. At some point, the government has to wake up and stop doing things that destroy other countries and kill innocent children. The ongoing embargo and sanctions against places like Iran and Iraq, Cuba, and others. They are doing nothing to change the world and are harming innocent children. I would like to address the state of Texas, and especially Joe Price, the district attorney who put me here. I am dying tonight based on testimony that all parties, myself, the man who gave the testimony, the prosecutor who used it, knew was a lie. That's really all I have to say, except that I love my family and no one has a better family than I do. Andre L. Graham, State, Virginia. On October 8, 1993, 23-year-old Andre L. Graham murdered 20-year-old Cheryl Stack and severely injured Edward Martin during an armed robbery in a Richmond, Virginia parking lot. Graham and at least one accomplice forced the victims to lie face down. He shot Stack in the head, killing her instantly, and shot Martin, who survived and later testified against Graham at trial. Identified by Martin in a photo lineup and convicted on 8 serious charges, Graham received the death penalty for the capital murder of Stack, as well as life sentences and additional prison time for other related charges, including robbery and malicious wounding of Martin. Andre L. Graham was executed by lethal injection on December 9, 1999, at 9:04 p.m. in Greensville, Virginia, at the age of 29, without intervention from the governor. His last meal was not recorded. Graham did not make any final statement before the execution, although in the days prior he continued to maintain that, while he had been present at the crime, he had not been the shooter. His last words were, Graham did not make any final statement before the lethal injection was administered. In the days leading up to his execution, he continued to maintain that, although he had been present at the crime, he had not been the shooter. Robert Ronald Atworth, State, Texas. On April 2, 1995, 26-year-old Robert Ronald Atworth murdered 56-year-old Thomas Carlson during a violent robbery in Richardson, Texas. Atworth convinced Carlson to follow him to a parking lot, where he shot him 4 times and stabbed him with a knife, also cutting off a finger and stealing a ring, wallet, and car keys. Atworth and his wife Colette attempted to hide the body in trash containers and were arrested the next day while robbing another residence. Atworth confessed to the murder, attributing it to his alternate personality, whom he called Nick. He was found guilty of capital murder in June 1996 and sentenced to death, a sentence upheld in 1999 by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. Robert Ronald Atworth was executed by lethal injection on December 14, 1999, at 6:21 p.m. in Huntsville, Texas, at the age of 31, without intervention from the governor. His last meal consisted of grilled chicken salad with ranch dressing, nachos with cheese and hot sauce, cookies and cream ice cream, and Coca-Cola. In his final statement, he expressed love for his family and accepted responsibility for his execution, saying, "First, I want to say that I love my family and accept responsibility for being here. To all of you who have malice in your hearts and hate in your veins, to all those out there who are like that and know nothing but negativity, kiss my proud Irish white ass. I'm ready, Warden. Send me home." Sammy Felder, Jr., State, Texas. On March 14, 1975, 30-year-old Sammy Felder Jr. robbed and murdered 42-year-old James C. Hanks, a quadriplegic Korean War veteran, at an apartment complex for the disabled in Houston, Texas. Felder placed a pillow over Hanks's face and repeatedly stabbed him in the neck and head with surgical scissors as Hanks screamed for help, taking his wallet afterward. After fleeing to Denver and Idaho, he was arrested and convicted of capital murder in multiple trials between 1976 and 1980. Sammy Felder Jr. was executed by lethal injection on December 15, 1999, at 6:15 p.m. in Huntsville, Texas, at the age of 54, without intervention from the governor. His last meal consisted of 1 pound of pecans. In his final statement, he expressed love for his friends and family, saying, I want everyone to know that I love you and appreciate everything you've done for me. I'm ready to go home and be with Jesus. I know he's waiting for me, that's all. I'm ready, Warden." The following individuals were executed in 1999, and despite research, no public photographs of them have been found. Additionally, their cases are relatively little known. John Walter Castro, State, Oklahoma. 22-year-old John Walter Castro Sr. murdered 31-year-old college student Beulah Grace Sissons Cox in April 1983, shooting her 3 times in the head after she offered him a ride near Oklahoma City. In June of the same year, he killed 29-year-old Rhonda Papin, a restaurant manager in Ponca City, stabbing her during a robbery. He was arrested on June 6, 1983, and after evidence was found in his home and the location of Cox's body was revealed by a cellmate, he was tried for both crimes, receiving death sentences in 1984 and 1985. Castro was executed by lethal injection on January 7, 1999 at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary at age 37. Before his death, he apologized to the victims' families and thanked those present on his behalf. Ronnie Howard, State, South Carolina. 27-year-old Ronnie Howard committed the kidnapping, robbery, and murder of Shin-Thi Nguyen Le, a Vietnamese refugee and mother of 3, in August 1985 in Greenville, South Carolina. Howard, a habitual criminal with a history of armed robbery, acted alongside Dana Ricardo Weldon. After staging a fake accident, they forced Lee into their car, beat her, and suffocated her with a plastic bag, dumping her body in an isolated area. Both were found guilty of murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, and conspiracy in 1986 and sentenced to death, though Weldon's sentence was overturned on appeal. The case sparked controversy due to the apparent exclusion of black jurors during the trial. Ronnie Howard was executed by lethal injection on January 8, 1999, at age 40 at Broad River State Prison in Columbia, South Carolina. His last meal was not recorded, and his final words were, "I'm on my way," as he softly sang to himself before the injection. Willie G. Sullivan, State, Delaware. 20-year-old Willie G. Sullivan brutally murdered 78-year-old Morris Dodd, the owner of a greenhouse in Frederica, Delaware, where Sullivan had worked, on December 27, 1991. Sullivan attacked Dodd with a metal shovel, stabbed him 10 times, and struck him with a concrete block, then stole money, ransacked the house, and took his car. Arrested on January 3, 1992, he initially confessed to acting alone, and despite his low IQ and diagnosis of mild intellectual disability, pled guilty to first-degree murder and other charges. A jury recommended his execution, and on December 30, 1992, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection, receiving an additional 23 years for other crimes. Sullivan was executed on September 24, 1999, at age 28 at the James T. Vaughn Correctional Center. His case drew international attention due to his mental disability and inadequate legal representation. Robert Allen Walls, State, Missouri. On December 5, 1985, 20-year-old Robert Allen Walls, along with Terry Wilson and Tommy Thomas, participated in the murder of Fred Harmon, an elderly man from Maplewood, Missouri. After planning a robbery, they beat and tied up the victim, placing him alive face down inside a freezer and securing the lid with heavy objects before fleeing in his car with stolen items. Although all 3 were directly involved in the crime, only Walls was sentenced to death, while Wilson and Thomas received life imprisonment. This sentencing disparity raised questions about fairness in the application of the death penalty. During appeals, Walls' defense argued ineffective legal representation and disproportional punishment compared to his accomplices, but the appeals were denied. After spending 12.5 years on death row at Potosi Correctional Center, Walls was executed by lethal injection on June 30th, 1999, at age 33. Norman Lee Newstead. State, Oklahoma. In February 1984, 30-year-old Norman Lee Newstead murdered 26-year-old taxi driver Lawrence Donald Buckley in Tulsa, Oklahoma, shooting him twice in the back of the head after asking to be taken to his sister's house. The investigation revealed Newstead was a fugitive wanted for a triple homicide committed 6 days earlier at a bar in Cedar City, Utah, where he and an accomplice killed 3 people during a robbery. In Buckley's case, Newstead claimed self-defense, alleging the driver tried to rob him with a knife, but the evidence and his criminal history, which included robbery, kidnapping, and use of a deadly weapon, supported his conviction. He was found guilty of first-degree murder on June 24, 1984, and sentenced to death. On July 8, 1999, at age 45, Newstead was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary after the Board of Pardons and Paroles denied clemency. His last meal consisted of 6 tacos, half a dozen glazed donuts, and a cherry Coke. He made no final statement. Alan Willett. State, Arkansas. In the early hours of September 14, 1993, 46-year-old Alan Willett brutally murdered his 13-year-old son Eric and his 30-year-old brother Roger, who had a mental disability, in their home in Johnson County, Arkansas. Fearing that the Department of Human Services would remove custody of his 3 younger children and his brother, Willett attacked them with an 8-pound iron window weight, killing Eric and Roger, and injuring his other 2 children, 17-year-old Ruby Ann and 6-year-old Jonathan, who managed to escape and seek help. Willett also attempted suicide by cutting his wrists and neck, but survived. He was convicted of 2 counts of capital murder and 2 counts of attempted capital murder, receiving 2 death sentences and 2 consecutive 30-year prison terms. After exhausting the initial legal process, Willett voluntarily waived his appeals and requested that his execution proceed, being evaluated by a psychiatrist who confirmed his mental competence. On September 8, 1999, he was executed by lethal injection at Varner Correctional Center, Arkansas, at age 52, in the second execution of the night following Mark Gardner. His last meal consisted of beef jerky, barbecue-flavored potato chips, onion sauce, garlic sauce, buttered popcorn, and Pepsi. When asked if he had anything to say before dying, Willett made no final statement. That's all for today's video, probably one of the longest, but it highlights the bloodiest year in the history of the United States when it comes to executions, 1999. Thanks for watching.